Chapter 23. Nick and Vito walked into the building and passed their small group of followers. Vito walked over and sat with a couple of guys, while Nick went to look for his brother. Mikhailov stood beside Kevin as Laura sat in the corner cleaning her gun. She often stayed to herself and didn't really trust the few remaining followers of Bezany. Mitch sat across from her with a scowl on his face, his arms crossed as he leaned back in his chair. "Hi, brother, glad to see you back. Just telling Kevin of our plans." Mick patted his brother's small frame. "So, Selena failed. Am I correct?" Kevin stepped forward and asked. Nick stood up straight and nodded. "Yes, I can assume that Paige is indeed in possession of the drive." Nick spoke to Kevin, who then looked back at Mitch. "Very well. All we need is for her to bring it to us." Kevin spoke again, turning to the two brothers. "Yes, I think it should be now," Mick said, nodding. "No, we need to bring her to a place where we have the advantage." Nick spat out in protest. Mick looked down at his brother, and his smile frowned. "Excuse me." He spoke harshly. Kevin shook his head. "I will let you two fight over this." He turned and walked over to Laura to tell her the news. Mick turned to face his brother and glared. "What are you doing? I'm the leader of this group, not you." Nick laughed and looked back at the skeleton remains of the once strong rebel army. "Yeah, 'cause you are doing such a good job." He spoke sarcastically. "Excuse me." Mick raised his voice again. "Father left me in charge, remember, Nika?" He blurted out. Nick's eyes grew wide and grabbed his shirt. As the younger brother snapped, he pushed Mick up against the wall. "Don't ever call me that," he screamed. "Oh, what is the matter?" "It is true. Father left me in charge because I am his firstborn son. He also thought you would never advance to anything. Being a mama's boy little girl, he called you Nika." Mick groaned a bit. "Yes, brother, but he made me keep an eye on you. I may have been born second, and closer to mother, but I am a better and smarter leader, and father knew that. That is why he pushed me so hard. You only became leader 'cause you were firstborn." Nick pulled him close and slammed him into the wall again. Vito hopped up and started to walk over to the two. The other members stood back. They knew never to get between the two when they were fighting. "Yes, but no matter how much you try, you," Mick's screams were cut off. Nick dug in his pocket and took out a knife, which he always carried. He went to cut his brother, but Vito grabbed his hand. Vito's other arm grabbed Nick around the waist and pulled him back. "Nick, it isn't worth it." Vito grunted, trying to hold him back. Mick glared at his sibling and then adjusted his shirt before storming off. Nick watched him and struggled to go after him, but Vito held him close. "Nick, please." Vito stood close by until he calmed down. Nick wiped his nose before storming out the other exit. Vito was not far behind like always. Nick sat outside and puffed on a cigarette. Vito stood across from him and leaned against the stone wall. Mick is the failure, and father knew it. He couldn't lead a horse to water. He flicked the ashes on the ground. Vito just stood there quietly, like always. "I may have been born second," but he tossed the cigarette butt with all his might in anger. He then placed his hand on his mouth and bit the inside of his cheek. "You were always a better leader than Mick, and he knows that," Vito told him. The rage filled Nicoli. He sat fuming over the words Mick dared to say. "He is lucky I did not cut him from year to year. Brother or not, no one speaks to me that way," Nicoli hissed. Across town, Nate stormed out of Fred's building and made his way down the streets of London. Here he was trying to help Paige, and all she did was argue with him. He would not have been in this mess if it wasn't for Paige. If he would have just kept walking and not have helped her that day, but he would still be in that awful mistake of a group. It was the biggest mistake he had ever made, and should have known nothing good would have come out of it. Nate was done with it. He was on his own, like he should have been from the beginning. The only setback was the fact that not only was Marina after him, but the whole Mexican cartel, as well as the American government now, thanks to Kevin. He also had the whole life that he owed to Johnny. Nate cursed and made his way into the pub on the corner. Nate walked in the smoky pub and had a seat at the bar. His elbows rested on the polished wood as he ordered a drink. The bartender placed a pint on a napkin in front of him, and Nate paid the man. He took a slow sip and sat it back down, watching the amber liquid in the glass. "You look down on your luck." A voice came from beside him. Nate looked up and over towards where the voice came from. His eyes fell on Marina as she slid onto the stool beside him. He then turned his head back to his drink and cursed under his breath. "I told you I would find you. Now give me a reason not to kill you right here and now." Since the conversation on the phone was pretty heated and we never did finish, Nate took another sip of his beer and cleared his throat. "I'm not the worst of your problems, Marina. You want the man really responsible for your father's imprisonment. Go find Kevin." He spoke harshly as he gripped the glass. "No, you want to redeem yourself and keep me from killing your girlfriend. You bring me to Kevin personally." She remained calm, but Nate could tell she was furious. "You think the great Nathaniel can handle that? Or do I have to go through with my original plan of skinning you right here? Then go after that pretty little girlfriend of yours." Nate tried to hold in his anger, as his hardened eyes slowly made their way to hers. "And the Cajun? What is his deal in all this?" she asked. "JJ brought me in like you instructed, and Kevin almost killed him. He is unsure who to trust, but I assure you he did not betray you, Marina." Nate didn't lie. Kevin did try to kill them. He just didn't tell her the whole story of JJ helping Kevin and the CIA to go against her and her father. A small favor he would cash into JJ if this all played out well. His hands would be clean, and JJ and Marina could dish it out alone. "Very well. I will make sure the Cajun gets a fair hearing from me." Marina turned and faced forward on the stool. "After this drink, we go find Kevin and sort this whole mess out," Marina commanded. "The sooner this mess is all sorted out, the better." Nathaniel mumbled. "I agree. Just be lucky I have mercy on you, and don't kill you for betraying me, for the bigger fish that I want is Kevin, but don't think you are in the clear, Nate. You caused a lot of this mess and will be punished." Marina hissed. "We will see about that." His harsh tone spoke as he watched the game that played on the TV in front of him. Either him or JJ was going to kill Marina, the bull knew that much. The Cajun and him may not be on the best of terms, but they did have a common enemy. Chapter 24. Fred, Paige and JJ packed up and made their way to the airport. Kevin had texted Paige where to bring the software, so all Fred had to do was borrow a plane from a fellow soldier to fly them out there. JJ was still pissed that Nate ran out on them. Nate owed JJ for saving his life a few years back, and he put his trust in the bull by telling him everything. Everything about his past and Kevin, and for him to run out like that, it drove the Cajun almost over the edge. At least he could help Paige and take out Kevin and possibly the Russian group. The same Russian group involved with the cartel. That would be one less enemy he would have to go through to get to Marina and her people. The whole situation was a mess. Fred piloted the small plane towards the small country of Chernobyl, the place where the Ukraine rebel group got its start possibly. JJ heard rumors from Vespa about how her father's partners, Vladimir, the man who put the group together, was involved in the great nuclear event. The great disaster of the Chernobyl radiation leak. The city of Pripyat, a town in Ukraine where the nuclear disaster that occurred on 26 April 1986 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The whole reason that the rebel group formed. Vladimir, along with others, were furious about the whole cover-up and decided to take a stand. He formed a group and vowed to take down and take over the Russian government. They wanted them to pay for the death of their families and the destruction of their home. Their noble cause turned criminal, just like JJ's endeavor. JJ looked over at Paige and could see she was hurting. He reached over and held her hand to comfort her. She was one to keep everything in, sort of like Nate, but the girl was much kinder. JJ could tell Paige was torn up by this world she was thrown into, but the girl kept a fighting spirit. He could also tell she cared a lot for Nate. "Don't let him get to you, Paige. He's the one who left and it had nothing to do with you. Nate is just bullheaded and wants things his own way. Don't worry, I'm here to help you and together we can take out that snake, Kevin. Paige leaned over and rested her head on Johnny's shoulder. She was so glad that Johnny was there to help her and comfort her. The whole time with Nate, she had to remain so hard and tough, and with JJ, she felt she could show that she was hurting. We should be there in about 3 hours, so rest up, mates. Fred turned to inform them. JJ nodded and patted Paige's hand. Don't worry, we are not stormtroopers. We know how to shoot, he smiled at Paige. Paige had no idea what he was even talking about, but not to be rude, she let a small laugh. The remainder of the fight was silent, except for the music blaring in JJ's earbuds. Music was the only way he could drown out his anxiety, paranoia, and demons. He just wanted this over with so he could deal with Marina and get back to a normal life, but deep down he knew he would never be normal, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Cajun was most likely going to end up in jail or dead. Fred landed the plane just outside the deserted city. They were to meet Kevin at the Policia Hotel, not far from where they landed. The sun had sunk low, and the chilly night air rolled in. Paige kept her hands in her pockets with a death grip on the drive. JJ walked alongside of her, his gas mask on top of his head, while his other weapons were hidden from sight. Fred walked a bit ahead of them, scouting the area as they walked through the abandoned city. It looked like something out of a horror show. The buildings were rubble and overgrown with nature, and the streets were an eerie quiet. The large hotel peeked out of the distance and made the Cajun's heart sink a little. He knew they were most likely walking into a trap, but he wasn't going to go down without a fight. He knew what he was getting into the moment he allowed Kevin to lead him to Marina. He just didn't know Kevin was going to backstab him. JJ looked around at the deserted town. The radiation of the area would be the least of his worries. It was the criminals that were there to kill them. Just like JJ figured, a figure stepped out in front of them. Frederick stopped in his tracks and braced himself for a fight. JJ stepped in front of Paige, a bit ready to back up Fred, if need be. Fred and the male just eyed each other like out of an old western, waiting for the other to draw. Where is the bull? A voice came from behind JJ and Paige. The two spun around to see Nick standing behind them. If this was Nick, then Vito was the 6'5" monster in front of Fred. He left. Paige said coldly as she eyed the man. That was not very noble of him, pity. He won't be here to watch you die. Oh well. I will get to him soon enough. Nick shrugged. We had an agreement with Kevin. I would bring the disc, and he would let Mitch go. Paige growled. Yes, you had an agreement with him, not me or Vito. And Vito wants blood for his sister's death. You'll have to satisfy the hangman until he can get a hold of Nate. Oh, won't it be fun to watch Nathaniel's reaction when we tell him that we killed and skinned his pretty little girlfriend? Vito let out a chuckle. Look, Pinky in the brain, why don't you go and play with yourself or do whatever Russians do to keep themselves occupied? JJ used his hand in a shooing motion. I am not Russian, you idiot. I am from the Ukraine. Our father hated the SSR and gathered others including some Russians to aid us, and you are mistaken. You see, the SSR tried to cover up the nuclear blast, and it was that cover-up that cost the lives of most of the city. My mother's life and my sister's. Do you know what it is like to lose your home, your mother and everything you know? Nick growled, walking towards them. Yeah, I do. Paige growled back and beat JJ to the punch. Well then you won't take this too personally, will you? I need that software. I don't want Kevin getting his greedy American hands on it. It is for us and our cause, not his. I know as soon as he gets it, he will just hand it over to his CIA scum. Nick stopped a few feet from them. I'm sure he will, but I needed to try and help Mitch. Paige argued back. Are we going to sit here and tell each other's story all drawn out like in an IM, or are we going to fight? JJ inquired. Vito growled and advanced on Fred. Fred stumbled back and tried to avoid the man's punches. JJ growled because he wanted to help but couldn't leave Paige unprotected. Nick grinned and watched the two in front of him. He started to sing an eerie song in his language that made JJ's skin crawl. JJ's demon screamed inside and clawed at his brain to be set free. Fred came sliding across the concrete beside JJ. JJ turned to see the large Vito pull out a rope. The hangman twists the rope around his hands, laughing at the Cajun. Yeah, that's not creepy, and they call me insane. JJ advances on the big man. Nick pulls out a gun on Paige, but she was quick to react. She wrapped her hand around the gun and brought it down while bringing her fist to Nick's face. Nick was caught off guard and stumbled a bit. He held on to the gun as well as Paige. The two wrestled for it, while Fred bolted up and jumped on Vito's back. Vito somehow had overpowered JJ and had the rope around him. Vito had the rope around the Cajun's neck and the Brit on his back, while Paige wrestled with Nick. JJ reached in his pocket to pull out a grenade. He popped the pin and slipped it in Vito's pocket, trying to stay conscious. JJ then elbowed the man in the gut, causing Vito to go forward. The Cajun slipped out of the rope and spun around. "Fred, get off!" he yelled, and Fred let go, dropping to the ground. JJ jumped up and kicked the large male in the stomach, with both his feet suplex style. Vito stumbled and then tripped over Fred, who was still on the ground. The giant fell to the ground with a thud, and JJ leaped up. He grabbed Fred and pulled him away from Vito. The two dashed away and jumped behind an overturned concrete column, just as the hangman stood up. "That is right, hide from," but before he could finish his sentence, the grenade went off. The explosion blast knocked down Nick and Paige, who were a good 20 feet away. Luckily, Paige threw Nick in front of her just in time. "JJ, you idiot!" "Paige!" Fred yelled after the explosion went off. The two hopped up and ran over towards the lump on the ground. Paige was under Nick, as Nick took most of the blast and shrapnel. "Paige, I'm sorry." JJ ran frantically towards her. Paige lay dazed under the body, moaning in pain. JJ and Fred reached her and peeled the body of Nick off her. JJ kneeled and cupped her cheek, praying she was all right. Her eyes fluttered open and glanced up at JJ. "Oh, thank God." He sighed in relief. "'Tis but a scratch," JJ spoke in a British accent. Fred glared at JJ. "No time for Monty Python quotes, mate." Fred disapproved of his timing. Paige used her hand to smack his side as she sat up. "You almost blew me up," she growled. "Well, she is fine." JJ upped where she smacked. "Good thing Nate wasn't here." JJ would have gotten worse than a smack. He believed Nate had a thing for Paige and vice versa. The two fought like a married couple already. Fred and JJ helped her up from the ground. Paige glanced down at Nick's body and shivered at the thought that could have been her. "Paige, I'm sorry, I really am." JJ kept apologizing while Fred looked around to make sure no one else was coming after them. Paige brushed herself off and started walking towards the hotel. "It's fine, Johnny, let's just get this over with." The two men followed after Paige. The trio stepped into the abandoned hotel. Leaves and debris covered the floor as the stained and peeling walls of the lobby gave off a haunted feel. Turned over and dust-covered furniture along with loose sheets of papers were strewn out everywhere. An old musty smell hovered in the dark hotel. JJ stopped and looked up at the high ceiling. There was a large hole that let the moonlight shine through, as a giant chandelier clung on its last leg to the only wire that held it up. "Glad you made it." A voice was coming from behind the main desk up ahead. The three turned towards the voice as Kevin stepped out from the shadows. "I'm not gonna grow a third leg, huh?" JJ blurted out as he heard this place was once full of radiation. He already knew the boogeyman that called out from the shadows, and JJ was not one bit afraid of him. Humor as always, Cajun. Kevin chuckled a bit in a sarcastic laugh which made the trio frown. "Where's Mitch?" Paige looked around for him frantically. Kevin snapped his fingers, and Mick and Laura walked out from the shadows with Mitch in front of them. "Where is the disc?" Kevin rubbed his fingers together, itching to get a hold of it. "This isn't the 80s, my man." "It is a USB, Mr. Hans Gruber," JJ spat off. "Die Hard 1?" Freddie asked, making sure JJ's reference was the one he thought of. JJ gave Frederick a thumbs up. This Brit was way more fun to hang around with than Nate. Paige slowly put her hand in her peacoat and pulled the drive out. She held it up to show Kevin she possessed it. The lighting inside the hotel was poor, but Kevin knew what it was. The lights that Kevin and his men did bring in was only enough to light up the small area of the lobby. Who knew what lay above them on the first open floor? No doubt it was the rest of the rebels there to take the three unwise men out. What was that explosion? Kevin asked, a bit curious as he walked towards Paige. Nick and Vito came after us. We took care of it, JJ spoke through gnashed teeth as he stood behind Paige. JJ was already pissed at the sight of Kevin. The sight of the man who betrayed him. You killed my brother. Mick raised his voice and went to charge them, but Kevin turned to place a hand on his chest, holding him back. JJ lifted a brow as he turned to look at Fred, but Fred was busy trying to make out if the rest of the rebels, the enemy, was above them or not. They came after us. Now, are we going to trade or not? Paige yelled, tired of this ring around. Kevin instructed Laura to hold the furious Mick back as he grabbed Mitch. Kevin pushed Mitch forward, and the two men walked towards Paige. Fred stood a few yards back, watching and trying to see into the darkness still, as JJ kept his eyes on Kevin. JJ had a feeling there were others waiting to execute them all as well. I don't like this, Fred whispered to JJ as he watched Paige walk forward. Kevin held on to Mitch's jacket as he reached his other hand out. He wouldn't let go until Paige handed the drive over. Paige looked at Mitch, who wore a face of fear. She then looked over to Kevin with a death stare. She wanted so bad to slap that sneer off his face. Paige reached out and slowly placed the drive into Kevin's hand. A bullet whizzed by and struck Kevin's arm. Kevin dropped the drive on the ground as he let out a scream of pain. Paige looked around frantically to see who shot him. Kevin stumbled over and pulled out his handgun. Kevin then scrambled for cover as he held his wound. Fred and JJ ripped out their guns quickly, as bullets from on top began to rain down. The two men jumped behind a couple columns and yelled at Paige to take cover. Fire from both sides of the top floor went back and forth, as if there was another force helping out the three. JJ pulled his mask down as he yelled for the still dazed Paige to get to cover. Mitch bent down and took the drive as Paige grabbed his arm. JJ and Fred gave them cover fire as they shot towards Laura and Mick. Laura sprinted out to help Kevin, but was shot down. Her body hit the ground and stopped motionless. Kevin screamed as he watched his partner fall to the ground, dead. Kevin then began crawl to an overturned couch and to take cover. Mick still sent bullets towards JJ and the others as he walked backwards for his own cover. Mitch and Paige ran toward where JJ and Fred were waiting just up ahead. JJ turned out from the first column as they passed and covered the two. He fired at Mick and his other men that came out of the shadows. Fred fired at the ones on high as Paige turned to see why Mitch had stopped. What? Are you hit? Her voice full of concern and fear. Mitch shook his head as he slowly removed a pistol and pointed it at Paige. Paige's eyes widened. Sorry, Paige, but that company belongs to me. You could never have handled this. Mitch pointed the gun at Paige. Her heart sank as she felt the betrayal wash over her. This whole time you were working for them, she growled. Not for Kevin, no. Mr. Alvarez. He promised me the shares of the company, plus Marina promised to back me on this play when her father was jailed. Sorry, my dear, don't take it personal. It's just good business. Fred was in the middle of reloading when he noticed Mitch pointing a gun at Paige. Without hesitation, the Brit bolted and grabbed Paige just as Mitch fired. The bullet struck him in the back a few times as they fell. JJ was too busy with trying to hold off the rebels to know what was going on. The fire was intense as bullets flew from both sides, ricocheting and hitting the decaying building. Paige let out a blood-curdling scream as they landed on the ground. Fred. She looked him over, but there was no response from him. Mitch walked over to where they were on the ground with a gun in one hand and the drive in the other. He raised the gun up and pointed it at her. Paige looked up as tears formed in the corner of her eyes. You son of a, my father trusted you. I trusted you. And you are no better than Judas himself. Paige spoke in a low, angry tone at the man she once considered family, her fingers gripping Fred's jacket as he lay dead beside her. Hot tears began to stream down the young woman's face. Mitch, the man she considered family, betrayed her and her father. All for business and money. Now, Fred, the man who protected her father and now her, laid lifeless in her arms. Paige wanted to jump up and rip Mitch apart. So much rage and anger bubbled up inside of her, and the only thing that stopped it was the silver gun pointed at her head. Kevin attempted to get up from the ground, holding his arm. As Kevin struggled to stand up, Marina came out of the shadows and used her foot to kick him in the stomach. He fell back down and let out a groan as the gun tumbled out of his hands. Marina pointed her gun at his face as she glared down at him with despise. So, I see you were the one who was playing my family this whole time. Kevin went to grab his gun that laid a few inches away, but Marina shot his hand. He let out a scream in pain as his back went to the overturned couch behind him once more. Marina proceeded to point the gun at him as she looked him over in disgust. She cursed him up and down in Spanish, while Kevin let out a sick laugh. I'm guessing Nathaniel told you. Did he tell you about himself and JJ conspiring to take you out as well? Especially, Johnny. That little Cajun has been helping me from the beginning. Kevin laughed. And Nate, he hated your guts so much, he jumped at the thought of taking you out. Kevin glared up at Marina. Marina listened to Kevin trying to talk his way out of dying. He might have been telling the truth, but it wouldn't save him. His silver-tongued talk couldn't rescue him from his death this time. Mitch walked toward Paige, who had the lifeless body of Fred in her arms. Her hands gripped his jacket in a death grip. It seems the soldier failed again to protect the Welsh family. Mitch grinned, pointing the gun at her face. Paige closed her eyes tight. If this was the end, so be it. She began to pray that God forgive her if she messed up. If and what she did was wrong, and that she only wanted to save her family, business, and friends. As a gunshot rang, her body jolted. Paige heard a thud, and when she noticed she wasn't hit, she opened them again to see what happened. Mitch lay dead in front of her. The room went silent for her, even though bullets still rang out in front. JJ screamed as he finally shot Mick and bolted behind a column. As he reloaded, he noticed Fred was dead in Paige's arms. He lifted his mask up slowly so he could get a better view. The paleness in his face and his slumped posture, Paige could tell JJ was upset. Paige noticed it was not JJ who shot Mitch but someone else. She also noticed the Cajun's eyes went from Fred to someone else behind her. Paige's head turned slowly to look behind her. A feeling of dread and anticipation overtook her until she realized who it was standing a few feet behind her. Nate stood there with his arm still aiming his gun towards the rebels. Upset over Fred's death, JJ loaded quickly and went guns blazing towards the remaining rebels. He didn't know the Brit that long, but he considered him a friend, and the bastards who were involved with this whole mess was going to pay. Simino. Nate screamed and went to run after Johnny. JJ rushed, the rebels' guns blazing, and disappeared in the darkness. Nate went to run after him, but he stopped short. He looked down at his side as the crimson liquid slowly dripped down. He then looked over to see Marina holding a rifle towards him. The bullet pierced through his vest and hit his side. Nate went to raise his gun, but Marina fired again and he dropped to the ground. Paige let out another blood-curdling scream. She grabbed the handgun from Fred and rose to her feet. She began to fire like a mad woman while screaming at Marina. A bullet grazed Marina's arm and she took off towards the darkness. Paige kept trying to fire an empty gun into the darkness, as her screams turned to sobs. She finally realized it was empty due to the clicking noise. Paige threw the empty gun as hard as she could in the direction Marina fled in a last effort to kill the woman who shot Nate. Paige dropped to her knees and crawled to Nate. Luckily he was still breathing, but for how long, she didn't know. Nate, she spoke in a raspy voice as tears fell from her green eyes. His eyes watched her lazily as he was trying to stay conscious. His bloody hand reached up to cup her face lovingly. Her hand cupped his as she pushed her cheek into his hand. Nate's eyes slowly closed, and Paige started to freak out. She screamed his name over and over, fearing the worst. Jesus, please don't let him die too. All this death was too much for her to handle. Suddenly Paige heard footsteps coming from behind her. She grabbed Nate's gun and whipped around, aiming it. JJ held his hands up and stopped running. Paige noticed it was Johnny and let the gun drop as if it weighed a ton. The gun slammed to the ground, and it was the last sound Paige heard. The hotel went silent as everyone else was either dead or dying. She then turned back to Nate and bent over to bury her face in his neck. JJ stood behind her and removed his gas mask from his head. He let it fall to the ground as he watched her cry. All this death and destruction. So many lives torn apart. He glanced around at the bodies strewn about. Fred, Nate, and so many others lay dead. His eyes then glanced down to a bag. He bent down to pick it up, and it had a picture of a pig on it. Just like the prodigal son, JJ had to end up in the pig pen, the lowest point of his life, to know he was doing everything wrong. If he survived this night, then the first thing he would do when he arrived back in the States was run to that church, and to that altar. Bright lights shone through the building as a helicopter's blades pierced the silence. It landed on the roof as agents swarmed in the hotel, yelling at JJ to raise his hands. Paige ignored them and continued to mourn over Nathaniel. Agent Jefferson made his way through the other agents to see Paige on the ground beside Nate. "Ms. Welsh," he called out his ear end to her. Jefferson made sure she was all right before pressing his fingers on Nate's neck. "He's still alive. Someone get a medic." Jefferson called out to the others as Paige's heart sank. Nate was alive, and he needed medical attention, quickly. JJ helped Paige up and away from Nate as the paramedics took over Nate's body, trying to stop the bleeding. Paige clutched JJ's arm in a death grip as she watched them carry him away. "I love him," she whispered. "I know." JJ didn't intend it to be a Star Wars reference, but things just always turned out to be some sort of reference with JJ, the big nerd. Chapter 25. The main person JJ wanted had escaped. His chance for revenge was taken. It took a lot to calm the Cajun down, but Jefferson made out a deal. The FBI wanted Marina as much as the CIA and Simino. JJ was really skeptical about making another deal with another government agent, but Paige convinced him otherwise. Plus, the way he was doing things were all wrong. Agent Jefferson was far from Kevin O'Neill. He actually cared about Paige and helped her bring all those that brought wrong upon her and her father to justice. It took a lot of explaining as well as deals to get Jefferson to convince the Cajun that he needed help. JJ would be forgiven of all his crimes if he would work with the FBI. He was brought in and gave them every bit of info he knew. He, of course, was going to be put in protective custody, but he wanted to help get Marina. The only way to do that was to make her come for him. JJ should have known Kevin was screwy because Kevin never brought him in for questioning, noting was on record or anything, but the Cajun was so hard up for revenge he didn't think. Jefferson had a time explaining to him how that was not going to work. How one man could not take down a whole cartel. JJ came close, but it was no chicken dinner. He needed help and he knew that, but trusting another government agency, after getting screwed over twice by another, the Cajun was a bit reluctant. But in the end, the cop and JJ won. He knew the proper way was best. He couldn't afford anyone else to die. After a few rounds of shouting and a long list of demands later, JJ finally agreed to all the terms. He had no choice really. It was work with the FBI or get thrown in jail right along with the others. His crimes were massive, and this was the only way Jefferson could guarantee him to not face jail time. A police officer, even an X1 in jail, would not survive, especially one with JJ's reputation. The FBI would gather more intel on the situation with the CIA, as well as help JJ construe a business, so that he could go undercover. The business was an extermination one, and it also allowed the FBI to help monitor everything going on for when Marina decided to rear her head up again. JJ was hoping, no praying she would show up. He was hoping the FBI would be far enough back for him to blow her head off himself, since JJ was no Batman. He wanted his justice, and that meant an eye for an eye. Paige and Nate would also be laying low together. The two gave the info on everything they knew, as well as going to testify against William. Plus, Nate was still recovering from his wounds with Paige by his side. Jefferson needed to keep them just as safe as JJ. The business, the rebel group as well as the cartel was slowly crumbling as most were either jailed or dead. Now that the FBI had JJ and his inside information, it was only a matter of time before Marina was in jail along with her father. Marina knew her time was slowly counting down. The few remaining cartel leaders also knew this, but her pride was getting the best of her. Marina wanted that trio dead, even if she was the one to pull the trigger. If she was going down in a blaze of glory and taking them with her. All three of them were the main reason for the downfall of her father, the Devils, as well as the criminal enterprise her family built. Marina would stay in her Mexican home licking her wounds and plotting her next move against JJ. The Cajun was her next target. JJ returned to a damaged home. The whole time he was gone, a few hurricanes had hit and tore everything up, forcing him to move. His mother was grateful to have him back alive, but had sad news. Sasquatch had grown sick and had just passed away from it. JJ moved on the outskirts of New Iberia way back in the marsh. He wanted to be as far away from people as possible. He explained everything to his mother and aunt, and asked them to keep his return a secret. They agreed and helped JJ move into his new home. It was a rough couple of months. Burying his dog, having to relocate, and trying to start off a new business. The business was for appearance sake as well as a new income for JJ. His mother and aunt helped out as much as they could, but they knew JJ was different. It was like he was a veteran returning from a hard war. The battle scars shone in his demeanor and ways. JJ didn't forget his promise. That Sunday, he made his way to his old church. 11 Jesus continued. There was a man who had 2 sons. 12 The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. 13 Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. 14 After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. 15 So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. 16 He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. 17 When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death?" 18 I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you." 19 I am no longer worthy to be called your son, make me like one of your hired servants. 20 So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. 21 The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." 22 But the father said to his servants, "Quick! Bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet." 23 Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. 24 For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. 25 Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. 26 So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 27 Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. 28 The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. 29 But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends." 30 But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. 31 My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. 32 But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. You see, no matter what we do, or how far we fall from God, His love, grace and mercy bounds us home. All we have to do is ask for forgiveness, change our ways, and He will. We are not promised tomorrow. Today is the day of salvation. We are not perfect. We cannot ever get good enough to get God, but with God we can get good. We have to make up our minds that we want to change and live for Him, and with Him living on the inside we can do just that. It is time to give up serving yourself and start serving Him. I guarantee He can heal all of your wounds, change your heart, and help you fight all of your battles. The preacher's words cut at JJ's conscience. A cold sweat broke out and JJ's stomach went into knots. He knew this whole time he had been doing wrong. Trying to do things his way instead of asking God for help. All the things he had done, the death, betrayal, and harm he had done to people, it weighed heavy on his heart. He knew he had to get right before it was too late. JJ stood up and made his way down to the altar. To his amazement, the preacher that spoke to him in the diner was visiting his old church. The pastor made his way to JJ and kneeled beside him. JJ began to weep from guilt. God wants to change you, JJ. He loves you and wants the best for you. All you have to do is to repent and give yourself to Him so He can wash you and create a new creature out of you. Us, humans, are always searching to fill that hole. Some fill it with drugs, alcohol and other things, but that hole in us belongs to God. Allow Him to fill you with His Spirit. JJ felt warm tears fall as he wept and prayed. He could hear God overpower his voices and speak. Stop fighting a fight that has already been won. For once in the years since the voices started, they were gone. Lord, I am not worthy. I have done so much. Please forgive me. That afternoon JJ was baptized and filled with the Holy Spirit of God. Now he had to change, not only his ways, but his very thoughts. He was a new man, set free of his chains, and promised God to live for him now, and allow Him to guide him through this life and jumble of a mess that JJ made. It is mostly a spiritual battle. You need to do the right thing. Yes, taking down this cartel is correct, but do not fight blood with blood. You do the right thing and give it to God. Allow the law, the very law you serve, to handle this. You had the right idea, just the wrong approach. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Chapter 26. After doing what JJ had been doing for so long, it was difficult to adjust. The Cajun had to change his whole way of living and thinking. His now elderly mother suggested a prayer journal or another animal to confide in. Something to give JJ a chance to take his mind off of things while he wasn't at church or on his new job. JJ couldn't bear to get another dog. Nothing could replace Sasquatch, his old patrol partner. All was not lost though. On one of his first extermination jobs, JJ had to take care of a raccoon's nest. The mother abandoned her babies and he had to crawl up to retrieve them. All of them had perished except for one. That one he took home, nursed back to health, and kept. It was hard to get close to something else, but the baby raccoon reminded him a lot of his brother, and he named it Sean. The business wasn't too hard to get a grip on. JJ was a country boy and was used to dealing with wildlife. Even when he was in the department, they would call him out on the animal calls. The insect extermination was just a small part of his new job. Mostly it involved corralling wildlife out of people's homes and yards. Slowly Johnny made better choices for his life, and with him getting older, it was for the best, really. For not only his physical being, but his spiritual man. He quit drinking, bar hopping and cursing. He even changed the type of music he listened to, as well as movies he used to watch. JJ spent more time at church and in the community helping others. His mother was proud of her son and supported him as much as she could. The Cajun had been through a lot, and his journey was far from over, but at least this time he would be doing it the right way. The way it should have been handled in the first place. It had been almost 4 months, and the Cajun was growing restless. No sign from Marina, and the constant looking over his shoulders was slowly getting to him. He continued to be on speaking terms with Nate and Paige, but the conversations had to remain short due to them in protective custody. Agent Jefferson would call in from time to time to check on him, as well as help reassure that he was doing the right thing. It took everything the Cajun had not to give in and go on another road trip to hunt down that wench. His friends and family were still in danger. Marina and her few followers were still out there, and JJ was the main target. He didn't care what would happen to him. He really just worried about the innocent people around him. His mother, his aunt, Nate, Paige, and his church, the ones he dragged selfishly into this mess. So, for their sake, and the sake of his new salvation, he did as Agent Jefferson told him. He waited. It might not have been patiently, but he waited. Patience eventually pulled off, but the whole plan sort of all changed when an unexpected arrival shifted things greatly. Chapter 27. 6 months later, it was a bright and steamy Louisiana summer day. An old white exterminator truck pulled up slowly to the large home in a small rich suburb housing part of town. The messy-haired JJ got out and placed an old worn-out Ford hat on his head before walking to the back of the truck. Upon arrival, he began to dig through the toolbox that was attached to the back of the pickup. JJ sighed in frustration when he couldn't find what he was looking for, so he turned his hat backwards and rolled up his gray overalls sleeve up. The back of the old truck was filled with chemicals, traps, and other tools needed for pest control. It was also filled with mechanics tools and a few welding tools. Since the Radiolay white chip paint truck was his work truck, JJ was an exterminator, but he did do handiwork for people from time to time. The Cajun also dabbled in fixing vehicles. He learned from his uncle growing up. The sides of it had Semino's Pest and Mechanics written along the doors in faded black letters. It also had a picture of a truck running over different pests like roaches, rats, and spiders in a comical way. It was sun-bleached and faded, but you could still make out clearly what it contained. The male found the brown sack and the gloves he needed. Finally. It's like searching for the Ark of the Covenant back here, he complained to himself. JJ then closed the toolbox and proceeded to walk to the nice brick home. It looked as if it was out of one of those home and garden magazines. It was a large brick home with the shrubs nicely trimmed along the front of the house. A couple birds bathed in the bird bath as the wind chimes rippled in the slight breeze. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a hysterical blonde woman comes running out her house, almost losing a shoe as she ran over towards his direction. "Oh, thank God, Johnny, you finally got here. I've been waiting all day," the Stepford wife yelled as she ran up to him. The woman put on the dramatics by placing her hand on her heart and breathed deep while she looked up at him. Johnny stood about a little over 6 feet tall, and has a small muscular build, so naturally he stood over her. He thought to himself as she was still trying to catch her breath. One would think with the dramatic act of running and flinging her arms everywhere that her hair would look like a hot mess, yet not a strand out of place. But then again, she had on so much hairspray she could make some 80s hair bands. Jealous JJ laughed to himself. The Cajun put up a hand to scratch his goatee while trying not to get annoyed with her. Once the dramatics were over, she reached out and clung to Johnny's arm in a pleading manner. He stroked her ego by patting her hand gently. "Now, Mrs. Arsenault, just take a few deep breaths and calm down. You know good ole JJ here," pointing to himself, "will take care of your rat problem." With gloves and a bag in one hand, and the other leading Mrs. Arsenault to her front door, JJ was trying his best not to cringe. JJ was trying his best to not become upset over her overreaction, or her heels would make that annoying screeching noise on her perfectly clean driveway. "Calm down, there is a huge rat in my house. It is squeaking and looking at me," she screamed as she pointed to the front door of her home. "Oh no, we can't have that." JJ smiled and spoke in a sarcastic tone, giving a little chuckle, but the woman, however, was not laughing. She didn't catch on to his sarcasm either. "No, we can't. Now please, Johnny, please." She ran her manicured nails down her face, digging into her cheeks. Okay. Okay. Don't go all poltergeist and start ripping your face off now. He lifted his brow with a little smirk. I can handle pest, but ghosts, better call the Ghostbusters. The Cajun chuckled again as he walked into her house. He glanced back to see if she was going to follow, but instead saw a look of confusion on her face. The woman snapped out of her daze and cried out to JJ. Oh no. I am not entering my house till I know you have it dead and gone. So I will be right here. She then slammed the door. Crazy woman. Rat. Probably just a mouse, but with her Xanax overdose, along with her midday alcoholic buzz PFT, it could be anything or nothing. JJ talked to himself as he walked inside two-story home. He noticed a trail of flung newspapers, a wine glass with a stain on the white carpet, and overturned dining chairs. It was a path of destruction, probably from her running bat crazy out the house. JJ shook his head as his eyes scanned over the mess she left behind. Housewives. JJ sighed as he followed the path of destruction leading to the kitchen, looking around a bit more for this pest. His movements were quiet and slow, so as not to spook the rat that he was looking for. JJ turned the corner, and the woman's Persian cat came barreling out the laundry room. Son of a JJ jumped and yelled as he dropped his stuff and put up his fists in the air about to punch something. Boo oi, you lucky cat. He glared at the cat as it ran off and jumped on the dining table. You should be the one catching this rat, you lazy bum. He shook his head, picked his stuff back up and proceeded to go through the house looking. As JJ went room to room, he began to sing the cops' theme song. Bad boys, busting through every door and taking the stance as if he had a gun. I can't believe she called me all the way down here for a rat that most likely isn't here. JJ went through both stories of the house, searching in every nook and cranny, and didn't see anything. As he walked back down the stairs, the woman put her face up to one of the massive stained glass windows that flanked her front door. Did you get it? She yelled with muffled cries. JJ stopped in his tracks and shook his head in annoyance. The whole time this Cajun was trying to be quiet, it was in vain. No, I didn't see anything. Are you? But as soon as he was about to say something else, he could hear a rustling noise in the attic. He looked up as he replied to her, yup. I think I just have. The woman shrieked and took off running out to the middle of her front lawn again. JJ smirked as he looked up at the ceiling. Gotcha, he grinned and went towards the pull-down ladder in the hallway. He pulled the string and unfolded the ladder, the whole time singing Renegade by Styx. Oh mama, I'm in fear for my life from the long arm of the law. He began to walk up the ladder slowly and carefully. Lawman has put an end to my running, and I'm so far from my home. Oh mama, I can hear you crying, you're so scared, and all alone. Hangman is coming down from the gallows, and I don't have very long. He reached the top and clicked the light on. It didn't light up the whole attic, so he had to take out his pocket flashlight. Johnny clicked the small flashlight on and slowly shone it throughout the attic. The light landed finally on the raccoon in the corner. The jig is up, the news is out. I finally found you, you little SJJ caught himself before he cursed. You little trash. He tucked the bag under his arm as he put on his gloves. He didn't have any traps big enough for it because the woman said it was a rat, so this was going to have to be hands-on. Should have known the dingy blonde, all doped up, wouldn't know what it was. As he took the bag from under his arm, he slowly rolled down his sleeves. Sweat began to bead and drip from his brow, as it was smothering in the attic. It was midsummer in southern Louisiana. The temp was already reaching 100, and it wasn't even noon yet. The attic had to be at least 20 degrees higher, for the air was thick and humid. Thank goodness the attic was big enough for Johnny to stand straight up, and not have to either slump down or crawl, unlike most of the other houses he did jobs for. JJ noticed the small hole where the little bugger had squeezed in, then looked back at the raccoon. You squeeze your big butt through this tiny hole. He shook his head and looked back at the hole. Seemed like this one thought he wasn't going anywhere anytime soon, since he made him a nice little nest with the insulation. Mrs. Arsenault was lucky the raccoon didn't go to town on her wires or through the few boxes she had up here. Alright Rocket, let's do this. Cracking his neck, JJ put the flashlight in his pocket and held out the bag he brought with him. The raccoon watched JJ, but just sat there. It stood up on its hind legs and sniffed the air a bit. That's it, nice and easy. He walked slowly toward the corner it was in. JJ inched his way slowly towards the raccoon. He didn't want to scare it off. He needed to be able to grab, bag, and release it back in the woods where it belonged. JJ preferred to catch and when release it came to raccoons and other forest animals. That's if they don't have rabies, and if they did, he would have to take it out of its misery. The raccoon bared its teeth when JJ got closer. Hey, now none of that, look, you don't want to live here. All that woman has to eat is her prescription pills, vodka and sadness, unless you're eating the leftovers from her takeout. But, looking at the fat cat downstairs, it seems he or she gets to it before you. He stopped just a few feet in front of the coon. Sean would like you, my pet coon. He needs friends, but I don't know. The coon darted between his legs and dashed for the open drop-down ladder. JJ turned and jumped for it. He landed on the hardwood flooring and caught a hold of the coon's tail. Gotcha. JJ blinked and realized in this moment that he messed up. Oh man. He screamed when the coon turned back and started clawing and biting at his hand. Luckily he had some tough gloves on. Ouch. Hey, cut it out. He growled as he tried to open the bag while getting to his feet. JJ had a death grip on the raccoon's tail as he tried to get the coon in the brown burlap sack, but the raccoon was putting up one hell of a fight. The thing bit and clawed at JJ's arm with passion, but JJ was not letting go though, and was lucky he rolled down his thick jumpsuit sleeves. Now that he got the coon in the sack, he needed the darn thing to let go of his arm, which he was able to do when he pretty much put a chokehold on the raccoon, just enough pressure for it to release his arm. As soon as it did, JJ hurried and tied up the bag. JJ walked to the attic entrance and turned the light off before making his way slowly down the ladder. He had the bagged coon in one hand and the other hand a death grip on the ladder. He slowly inched down, clinging onto the ladder as it wobbled a bit. He got about halfway down with no trouble before the coon starting to act up, hissing and moving around frantically. The bag, which so happened to be above JJ's head, hit him in the head, and he let go of the ladder, which made him fall the rest of the way down, landing on his back. Thank goodness there was carpet to cushion the blow, otherwise it would have been horrible. The fall knocked the wind out of him, and the bag landed on his chest and rolled off. The coon was still going crazy trying to escape. He let out a moan and a gasp as his eyes went wide for a moment. Oh, I'm going to feel that in the morning. He groaned and was trying to move. He saw the coon trying to claw through the bag. Oh no, you're not going anywhere. He reached and got a good handle on the bag. He let out another painful groan as he slowly got up from the floor. The Cajun placed a hand on his back and rubbed it a bit, trying to make the pain go away. You are a freaking terror and a half, devil coon. He closed the ladder up and pushed it back in the ceiling. JJ walked past the fat cat who was watching the whole ordeal. The cat twitched its tail and stared at JJ with his judgmental eyes. JJ glared back at the fat cat. If you could have done better, then you should have. JJ shook his head again as he walked past him. JJ then proceeded to make his way out of the house, avoiding stepping on the woman's mess. Well, Mrs. Arsenault, I got the rat. He held up the bag to show her the struggling coon. The woman shrieked again and took a couple more steps back. Thank God. She shivered and made weird noises before darting to her door. JJ watched her run back inside, and he rolled his eyes as he turned to walk to the back of his truck. He placed the bag in the back of his truck, and then pointed to the screeching bag. Now you behave. JJ then turned when he heard the woman approach him again. She was rambling about all sorts of stuff, but JJ just tuned most of it out and nodded politely. Mrs. Arsenault then handed him $100 bill. Oh no, ma'am, I don't need that much. He let out a small chuckle and tried to protest, but the woman stuffed it in his hand. JJ, you are the best rat catcher and the only one who would come on short notice. You deserve it. Plus you can take that young lady out for dinner. She pointed to his truck's passenger seat. He knew he didn't have anyone with him, So what the heck was she talking about? JJ turned his head toward his truck, and to JJ's surprise, Mrs. Arsenault was right. Narrowing his eyes, JJ noticed a small-framed, almond-colored female. His heart nearly sank in his gut, but he didn't show it. He kept up his normal cheerful mood, so as to not alarm the woman. JJ could not afford to let her know who he truly was. He needed this job and his cover to stay intact. "Will do, ma'am." He played it off with a salute and watched the woman walk back inside. As soon as he watched her close her door, his smile dropped and the Cajun got serious. With his hands in his pockets, he slowly walked around his truck. JJ then reached down under the cab where he had a secret compartment containing a Glock .45, all the while whistling a tune. After retrieving the gun, JJ held it close to his leg between him and the truck cab, so no one passing, nor the person inside, could tell he had anything. Was this Marina? Was this one of her people come to kill him? JJ's heart and mind was racing. The Cajun slowly walked to the driver's door and reached out and rested his hand on the handle. JJ's stomach was in knots and his heart raced fast. He took a deep breath before slowly lifting up the handle and opening the door. JJ slowly peeked his eyes inside of the truck with his gun at the ready just in case. The young woman didn't even notice him. She had headphones in and was playing on her iPhone. JJ looked down both ends of the street to make sure no one was coming up or down it, before he quickly hopped in his truck. JJ pointed the gun at this mystery woman as he closed the door with such force that it rocked the truck. The female still didn't notice him. He had lowered the gun, laying on his leg with his finger on the trigger pointed at her. He had it lowered low enough just in case any passerby came along. He scanned her to see if she had any weapons. That's when she turned and saw the gun. Her eyes grew wild. Whoa, she put up her hands up defense and took her earbuds out. "Hold up, I'm not here to hurt you." Her honey and blue-colored curls bounced along with her hands. "Who are you and who sent you?" he demanded. She didn't look like a typical-looking hitman or government agent. To be honest, she looked like a punk kid hooker, or something. JJ guessed the girl, or young woman, was around 18 or in her early 20s. Her off-colored hair ends and the fact that she also sported a lot of piercings in her ears and one in her nose, gave her the look of a normal teen of today. She was wearing a pair of Daisy Duke cut-off shorts, a spaghetti-strap tank top with a plaid long-sleeve shirt tied around her waist. Her combat boots were untied, and JJ could see at least 2 girly tattoos on her crossed ankles. Her skin wasn't dark, it was more of a mixed color, a light almond brown. The girl stared at the gun with her hands still slightly raised. The shock of its presence made her mute for a moment. JJ eased up a bit by leaning back in his seat, but kept the gun pointed at her. "Look, I'm not looking to get laid or anything, so take your love you long time for $5 up the street, okay?" The girl's mouth dropped at his comment. JJ looked around to see if anyone was coming or going, in a paranoid way, before his eyes settled on her again. Well, he gave her an impatient face. "Look, I didn't know you would be this crazy." She finally closed her mouth and gave him attitude. "Shaw, I'm a nuclear bomb full of crazy. Now why don't you get out and be on your merry way?" He still had his gun pointing at her from his leg. "No." She crossed her arms. "No." "What do you mean, no?" He lifted a brow. "Auntie told me to come find you and live with you." She rolled her eyes and bent over to reach her hand in her book sack that was at her feet. "Hey." He went to raise his gun, not trusting her, but she lifted one hand up. "I have a letter from my aunt and my mother. She told me to find you and give it to you, my father." JJ looked at her sideways. This wild child was claiming to be his daughter. It was truly about to be some worried drama in 1.5 seconds. She slowly took the envelopes out and handed them to JJ. He leaned over, slowly watching her, then quickly snatched them from her. He glanced at the papers in his hand, then back to her. "Don't move, or I will shoot you in the knee," he warned her. He took his hand off his gun to open the first letter. He read the first few lines, and his body almost went slumped in his seat. Chapter 28. Dear Johnny, I am truly sorry for running out on you all those years ago. You thought I was cheating on you, but I never did. I was pregnant and scared. Scared about our future, my future and the baby's future. So, I ran away and went back to my mom's. The man who picked me up that night was my sister's husband. You gave him quite the beating, and the rage you went into. I was too scared to explain anything. I just wanted to leave. I was young and we had just been going out for a couple months. I wasn't really in love with you as I should have been, and for that I'm sorry. I wrote this letter in case something would happen to me. I wanted you to be in Annie's life, but my parents wouldn't let me tell you. They never did like you. They said you were a wild card and a joke. I am so sorry for this. I wanted Annie to go and live with my sister, but she can't handle Annie like I know you can. She is just like you, and you know my sister is stuck up and thinks she is too good for anyone. It was wrong for me to keep all this from you, and I pray you will forgive me one day, but for now please take care of my little dreamboat Annie. Sincerely, Rebecca. JJ finished reading it and ran his hand over his mouth and down his chin. He glanced over at his daughter and back at the letter. Annie, huh? He simply said. Your mother always loved that band. Music was how we met, really. It was a long pause in silence as the two just sat there awkwardly. So, do you still want me to leave? Annie finally spoke up. JJ shook his head. No, you can stay. You are my daughter after all. JJ was still shell-shocked about the whole thing. This whole time he hated Becky cause he thought she cheated on him, and come to find out it was because she was pregnant. If only Becky would have told JJ about his daughter, he would have done things differently and wouldn't be in the predicament he was in at the moment. He wished he knew about her, so he could have been in her life, and that pissed him off that Becky never told him. You hungry? He asked as he put his gun between the seat and looked over at her. Annie nodded and kept her eyes on the letters in his lap. Are you going to read the one from my aunt? She asked, and JJ shook his head. Nope, she was a wench, and I really don't feel like dealing with anything else at the moment. By the way, what happened to Becky, Rebecca, your mom? And how did you find me? He started the truck, the Christian channel came on, and he lowered the volume. Mom got cancer and passed away a few months back, and I was left with my aunt to live with. Then I got into trouble and she kicked me out. I had nowhere else to go. Annie explained. I found you by looking you up on the internet. You know you can find anyone on there. I wanted to at least meet you. She gave him a little smirk. I saw that you had a business, and once I got here, I just asked around, and some old man at the coffee shop by the Greyhound bus station told me that you were on a call and told me, where are you, mad? Annie asked. JJ looked in his mirror before pulling out onto the street. I'm mad I was never told about you and didn't get a hand in raising you, but, no, I am not mad at you. You probably think I'm a deadbeat. He frowned as he drove up to the stop sign. Annie shook her head. No, Mom explained it all. I was always mad at her for not letting me find you. We got into it a lot. I guess that is why I acted out. She said as she put her seatbelt on and rested her elbow on the armrest, and just stared out the window and sighed deeply. JJ drove down the streets of New Iberia until he came across the Raising Cane's fast food joint. He pulled in, making sure it was in the shade, and got out. He waited as Annie got out, then said, We kinda need to make this quick so I can go and release the crazy raccoon. JJ pointed to the burlap sack that was still in the back of his truck, trying his best to get out. Annie nodded her head as she watched the coon that was going National Geographic crazy. As they walked up to the joint, JJ noticed Annie was a bit quiet. She must have got that from her mother, because when they were together, Becky was quite a lot as well. Always thinking, JJ guessed. But one thing was for sure, he didn't need a paternity test to prove that was not only his child, but also Becky's, since she was a splitting image of his one lost love. JJ was glad to have a daughter and be united with her, but the timing was all wrong. He was still undercover for the FBI, and waiting for Marina to attack. How was he going to do all that on top of protecting his daughter? As JJ and Annie were seated near the front of the restaurant, waiting to be served, a black car with dark tinted windows slowly drove by JJ's truck. They observed JJ with some girl inside the place as the right window rolled down. The dark-colored male inside observed them for a minute before he took out his phone dialing someone as he sped off into traffic. The male almost caused an accident, which had the other cars honking their horns, which had JJ and the others in the restaurant turning to see what was going on. The black car was long gone before JJ could catch a glance. Their food came just in the nick of time cause JJ could feel his paranoia kick in, but he did his best to hide it from his daughter. It was quiet at first until Annie opened her mouth. "So I know about Mom, but what about you?" she asked, dipping her fries in ketchup and then taking a bite. "What do you want to know?" he asked, munching on his garlic bread. "Everything. Your mom, my grandma, your story. I would like to know my dad." She smiled a bit and looked over at him. JJ wasn't expecting this. He expected her to be this over-dramatic teenager yelling and cussing him out for not even trying to find her. But instead he sat across from this calm young woman, wanting to know about JJ and his side of the family. He wiped his mouth with his napkin and began to explain a bit of his life like she wanted to know. "Well, let's start out that I was a police officer at one time." "You were a cop, I want to know about this," Annie said with excitement. JJ gave her a half smile. "It's not all crack up like you see on the crappy TV show Cops or anything. In fact, let me tell you what my instructor told us." He takes a sip of his drink and clears his throat to sound like his old instructor and began. "Well, it takes a certain kind of individual to become a police officer. Someone who would put themselves into the line of fire, who would risk not only their physical health but mental health as well. This job is not for just anyone. You have to have a certain mentality, a calling for it. To be able to go out there and face the crazies as well as, at times, the most brutal people, and not become like them at the end of the day. To run towards the gunfire and not away, to be the one who makes a stand and upholds the law, even when everyone is up against you. Not only the criminals, but the citizens and even your family sometimes." JJ paused and watched Annie's reaction. "Want me to go on, or is this too boring for you?" She shook her head, to say no. "It isn't boring." As she popped another fry in her mouth, JJ shrugged and said okay then and went back into his instructor voice. "You are out there, protecting and serving the community and always get looked down upon. Damned if you do and damned if you don't. You're always under a microscope, and the slightest mistake, you could get 10 times of hell rained down on you. So no, this is not for everyone. You are paid next to nothing to make split-second decisions that could have the greatest outcome. I'm talking about life or death." JJ stopped with the instructor voice, and turned his head back to look at Annie's smirk. This was the first of many speeches, and although he spoke on many things, this speech always stuck with me. "Yeah, I can see why," she said, while pushing her now empty plate away. "But now you have me wanting to know more. What was the craziest call you ever went on? Did you ever shoot someone? Did you ever get shot?" she said, smiling. JJ chuckled and signaled the waitress for the check. "Well, that's gonna have to wait till we get out of here. Let the raccoon, who is probably pissed by now, and get to my place." He tossed their trash and they were out of the door, heading back to the truck. He walked a few feet behind her, watching his daughter text on her phone. It was almost too much to believe. Johnny Simino, the once Cajun devil hitman turned exterminator, now a father. JJ had missed most of his life by chasing after his revenge. Regret flooded along with his memories of all the pain and hurt he not only caused but felt. He didn't want any of that for Annie. JJ was afraid. Afraid this was too good to be true, that this was just a dream. Afraid Marina would find them and kill not only him and his mother, but his daughter as well. He was skeptical about the whole thing, but the letter was in Becky's writing as well as a few details no one else knew but Becky. JJ would get with Jefferson to confirm, of course, but in the meantime he would just enjoy this little joy. JJ wanted a normal life away from all this revenge and pain of losing his brother as well as life. Annie was a godsend and gave him more hope. He just met her, of course, but something about being a father and the little bit of time he enjoyed. Once they got to the truck, they saw that the bag with the raccoon was still there, but was motionless. Do you think it's dead? I mean, we were in there for a while and it is hot as hell out here. Annie looked up to JJ and asked, "Why don't you pick up the bag and see?" He replied with a smirk, "Oh no. I am not touching that thing with a 10-foot pole." That's when JJ reached in and poked it. The coon went ballistic again, which made Annie jump back. They both let out a laugh. "Nope, he's still alive," JJ laughed as he unlocked the truck and got in. "That was so uncool of you to do," she said with a slight laugh. "Okay, I'm sorry, but the look on your face when it moved again was priceless. Reminded me of your mom." JJ stopped right there because he didn't want to go back there, not yet at least. Becky was the only woman he ever loved and he never really moved on. The Cajun started up the truck and turned onto Main Street. His guard was up, but he did his best not to show it. He didn't want to freak the young woman out, nor have to explain everything at that moment. "We will need to go to the store first. I don't have much at my place," he shrugged, looking over at her. "Okay, but on the way there, you could at least tell me one story of when you were a cop." She gave him a cheeky smile. JJ looked over at her and couldn't help but give in. "Okay. Fine, just one till we get to the store, then back home." JJ told her a few of his silly stories he had. He loved the way she laughed. It reminded him of Becky and a past that he missed. He missed being able to make others laugh and not being the crazy devil killer. In those moments, everything felt normal, and he was able to get his mind off his horrible crimes as well as his situation, but soon his smile faded. He knew he had to tell her everything. He had to protect her from getting hurt. She probably had been through enough in her life. He didn't want to dump his crazy problems on top of it. They were his problems, his cross to bear, not hers. Once they got out of the truck, they both looked in the back to make sure the raccoon was still there. "Ain't it gonna die if it ain't already?" Annie asked as the bag wasn't moving anymore. JJ poked at it again, and it hissed and moved hysterically, which made JJ jump back a little, laughing. "Nope, not yet, but now I know he will be pissed if I don't get him out soon," he said as they walked side by side into the store. JJ grabbed a buggy, and they started walking through the store silently. Then all of a sudden, Annie burst out. "So what was it like being in cop school, or whatever you call it?" "Sorry, I don't know anything else about you, and I would like to." JJ looked shocked at his daughter. "You really want to hear what it was like in the police academy, or about this old fart?" He cocked his head to the side, waiting to hear that she was joking or something, but the look on her face told him she was serious. "Well, okay, then." He proceeded to tell her all about his time in the academy, recalling by memory as if he was still in. "So wait, you met Mom in a men's bathroom?" Annie lifted a brow as she put a few bags of chips in the buggy. "Yeah, what? You thought we met in the romance section of Barnes & Noble's bookstore, like every other cliché story?" he asked as he watched her put the bags of Lay's BBQ potato chips in the buggy, and smiled, then said, "You might want to add another bag, since that is my favorite type. Mine too," Annie said with a slight laugh. "I guess we will be fighting over the bags then." She gave him an evil smirk and he couldn't help but laugh. "My favorite color is camo," JJ blurted out. Camo? Camo isn't a color." She lifted a brow. Yes it is." JJ blinked his eyes all sassy like as Annie just rolled hers. "What is yours?" JJ asked. "Blue." She tugged at the end of her curls, pointing out the light blue hair dye. "What else do you like beside Hot Topic garb?" JJ teased her appearance. JJ could tell she didn't like that question because she practically ignored it. He got it. She was acting out like he did when he was younger, and he was sure she heard an earful at home for her dress and appearance. JJ dropped it for now. JJ waited a moment to see if she had any more questions before continuing. "So anyways, I escorted your mom back to the bar, and?" Annie asked, wanting more of the story. "And we started dating afterwards." He shrugged as he pushed the buggy down the aisle, getting closer to the front end of the store. "I'm not much for romantic stories, and it is really hard to talk about your mother." Can you give me some time to adjust a bit and get used to having you around, and then I will tell you more, all right? He felt bad because he knew she wanted to know more about her mom and him, but that was still a touchy subject. She turned her head and nodded with a smile. Okay, Dad. Wait, it is okay to call you that, right? He smiled and nodded, and for the first time in a while he felt normal, maybe even a little happy. The two got in line to check out, and all JJ could do was smile as he watched her flip through some tea magazine. You know, this is the very store I hit that guy with a can of green beans for stealing. Annie lowered the magazine and lifted a brow. You hit him with a can of green beans. What kind of mess? Annie chuckled a bit. I remembered it in a movie and instinct kicked in. JJ shrugged. Old movies were weird. She put the magazine up. Yes, so are some of the new ones. That vampire dude and that wolf guy and girl, all drama like a soap opera. JJ couldn't think of the name. That's Twilight, and not a true representation of vampires, Annie spoke as she put the groceries on the belt. JJ fake sniffled and wiped the faked hair away. You are my child, I am your father. The last part he spoke in his Darth Vader voice. With me, the Force is strong, Annie said in a Yoda voice. Chapter 29. The two finished paying for all the groceries and were putting them in the back of the truck, far away from where the raccoon was. After emptying the buggy, they both hopped in the truck, fastened their seatbelts, and were back on the road, heading towards his place. JJ's place, which now will be their place, just another thing JJ needed to get used to as he glanced over at Annie from the corner of his eye. Annie was just looking out of the window, checking things out, he guessed, but the silence was killing him, so he spoke up. So is there anything else you want to know? Annie turned her head and shrugged a little, like she was thinking. What about the rest of our family? She gave him a small smile, like she was not sure that she should have said our, but it is her family too, JJ thought. He cocked his head a bit as he kept his eyes on the road, trying to figure out where to start. Well, they are your family too, so I don't mind telling you. It's just, where to start? He looked over to her and gave her a smile before putting his focus back on the road. They still had several miles to go before home, so he figured now would be a good time to tell his daughter everything about his family. Well, my mom, your grandma, was a caregiver, used to like to go to the casino a lot, but when Dad died, she found God and became a church-going woman. She had a sister and my uncle was a cross-country truck driver. That's how we learned a little about fixing cars, but my brother got obsessed with them, big time. He paused as he looked in the rear-view mirror. He had the strangest feeling that they were being followed, but he didn't see anything out of the ordinary. JJ just brushed it off and continued with talking about his family. My dad was a welder, but died when I was in high school. I pretty much became the man of the house. Annie turned and looked at him with a little bit of sadness in her eyes. That made JJ feel awful because he knew how she felt not having a father when you need one, but he told himself that it wasn't his fault. JJ didn't know, nor did anyone ever reach out to him about Annie. He looked away from her while trying to calm himself down when he felt her hand on his arm. Hey. I told you, I don't blame you at all. How can I blame someone who didn't even know? She gave him a little smirk which made him calm down even quicker. She took her hand off him, then asked, So, can you tell me about your childhood? Annie questioned as she settled back in her seat. JJ let a small smile show. I wasn't anything special. I was on the baseball team in high school, could have went to college, but I was lazy. Sean and I, both were some good old A boys, always getting into trouble being daredevils and petty stuff like building ramps to jump our bikes into the bayou. I broke my arm one time doing that. He paused and let out a laugh, remembering that one. Sean kept stealing my baseball cards when we were in middle school, so one day I caught a crawfish from the yard and put it in the small tin box that I kept my cards in. Mama never believed me that Sean was stealing, so I was going to prove it to her. So when he went to take my brand new cards, the crawfish got his finger. He came running in with the crawfish connected to his finger. Back then, Sean was such a mama's boy, so he cried to her for everything, and I always got in trouble for it. if I did it or not, JJ explained. Anyways, he came running to Mama bawling and crying his little eyes out, with this huge crawfish hanging from his finger, and I walk into the room to watch the whole thing. He paused to laugh. Well, that proved to Mama that this whole time Sean was lying, so he got a good old butt whooping. Good thing too, 'cause if he never would have found that crawfish, Mama would have never known he was a lying little turd. Plus, could you imagine the smell? JJ kept getting that strange feeling again, so he kept checking all the mirrors, and again still nothing seemed out of place. When we got older, I was more into hunting and fishing, but Sean, he liked her ace. He would get in trouble a lot for it. I guess that's why I became a cop, to help protect him and Mama. Plus I always liked to help people. I always helped the neighbors out and whatnot. Was that the only reason you became a cop? Annie asked out of curiosity. That had JJ laughing a bit and asked sarcastically, what? So I can stop my brothers from stealing from other brothers. Which costed him a punch in the arm by his daughter. No. 'Cause you like helping people. Then a look of shock crossed her face and put her hands up to her mouth, mumbling out, OMG. Is that assault on a police officer? JJ broke out laughing and teasing her. No, Annie, it's okay. He smiled over at her and then teased her. Did anyone ever tell you that you hit like a girl? Still laughing but checking the mirrors all at the same time. She gave him a playful glare. I can hit harder, if I need to, sticking her chin out in defiance. I have no doubt, Sean, no doubt about that at all. He gave her a smile and kept driving. So if you didn't join to help out helpless brother Sean, why did you join the academy? She asked seriously. Are you sure you want to know everything, because it can be quite boring? She nodded. Alright, cue the flashback montage music. He continued to tell her his story in the third person. After graduation in '89, the young Johnny didn't really know what he was going to do. A lot was going on in the Simino household lately. His father died, and young Johnny was looking for purpose. It ripped apart his mom. She wasn't the same after the whole ordeal, always out and about and barely around. She was either at the casino, her sisters, or church. They had moved clear across New Iberia, so his mom could be closer to his Aunt Claire. When they did, Aunt Claire really got his mom into church more. She even stopped going to the casino, which was a big thing. That used to be his mother's favorite thing to do, to gamble and eat at the casino. To JJ, that was her way of coping with the loss of her husband and the boy's father. Growing up, Johnny and his brother were always being dragged to church by their aunt. Annie finally spoke up. Okay, Deadpool, can we stop the fourth wall and referring to yourself in the third person? JJ let out a laugh. When her husband, Max, left her for another woman, Aunt Claire got into the church hardcore. Me and Sean went every Wednesday and Sunday to church until we were in our teenage years, and it became less church and more of the nightlife. Pool at the bars, running the back roads, women, music, concerts, and movies. I was really into rock music. AC/DC, Pink Floyd, Van Halen, and some of the local bands as well. We went to the bars for the live shows as much as possible. Every time we would, Aunt Claire would have a hissy fit and tell us how it was the devil's music. I just agreed to be polite and not talk back or be disrespectful. Sean would go with me a lot of the times, but just for the pool and chicks. Sean would often leave early to go do some street racing, as he loved his muscle cars, and he loved to race them equally as much. I was into baseball in high school, and after I graduated, I joined an adult team for a while. Took up a job at an auto shop, thanks to my uncle who taught me all there was to fixing vehicles and other things as well. Sean, of course, had to follow along, being a big car freak himself. In my free time, I would be with him or my cousin from my dad's side of the family. I had girlfriends here and there, but nothing too serious. Us boys would cut up and drink a lot, just having the time of our lives, but I knew that I couldn't do this forever. I needed to find a career and possibly raise a family. Needed something I could do to make myself useful and not just some deadbeat, living with his mother till the age of 40. I wouldn't find my calling to become a policeman until the day I stopped a robber. He paused to take a breath and a drink of his drink, looking over at his daughter. You sure you want to hear the rest of this? She nodded quickly. Well, okay then, JJ replied as he finished explaining everything up until Sean's death. He stopped there because he knew he would have to explain what happened after that, and that was a story he wanted to avoid. So that's how you became a cop? Wow. That's a lot better than cause you wanted to save brothers from getting their baseball cards stolen. She let out a little giggle. Yeah. He gave her a smirk, still getting that feeling of being followed, but not wanting Annie to freak out, so he disguised it. So, ever since I found out you were my daughter, which was like 2 hours ago, I actually don't know anything else. So why not tell me more about you this time? He looked over at her, giving her a smile which he was hoping didn't show his paranoia kicking in about being followed. He kept looking in the mirrors as he waited to see if she would tell him about herself. He wanted to know, especially now that she will be in his life. The Cajun still felt the tinge of pain that he missed the best parts of her growing up, but he wasn't going to dwell on it at the moment. She was here now and that's all that mattered. So you gonna tell me, or do I have to do a GD mind trick on you? He grinned and waggled his eyebrows at her. She laughed as she rolled her eyes at him. Yeah, like you can do that. Hey. You don't know what kind of tricks I have up my sleeve. They both laughed together. When the laughter faded, she started toying around with her earbuds. I don't know. What do you want to know? JJ looked over at her as she played with the cord. Anything you want to share with me. It's up to you. Like, did you graduate? Are you thinking about college? When is your birthday? He bombarded her with questions this time, like she did him, smiling the whole time. Annie, still playing with the cord, started answering his questions. Yes, I graduated 2 years ago. I was born in '94. She spoke softly. So you're 21, then? You look younger. I thought you were like 17. JJ then fell silent again, allowing her to continue. I don't really want to go to college. I hated school. I used to get in trouble a lot for my smart mouth. JJ chuckled a bit, and this made Annie smile. I'm guessing you don't have a job. What about a boyfriend? JJ lifted up a brow after he asked the question. Annie shook her head. No, I was dating a guy back home, but nothing serious. JJ let out a sigh of relief. Annie couldn't help but smile again. So what do you like to do, besides getting in trouble? JJ looked in her direction. Annie was still lost, a bit in a daze as she would wind and unwind the cord around her fingers. I like to listen to music, play video games, read mangas, Tumblr, watch TV, normal things, I guess. She finally stopped playing with the cord and put it in her backpack. What is Tumblr? JJ asked, confused. Annie tried not to laugh. It's best that I save that for another time. JJ raised a brow as he glanced at her sideways. Okay, so what kind of TV shows? He asked. Doctor Who, Supernatural, Sailor Moon, stuff like that. Annie watched out of the window, at the passing trees. I heard of Doctor Who, but it looked too confusing. Maybe you can explain it. And Supernatural? Never heard of that one. JJ reached up and scratched his head. The Cajun was trying everything to find something in common with his daughter, but he never grew up with her, so it was really hard. They both liked movies and TV shows. That was at least one thing. I always wanted to learn how to shoot a bow, I guess. Annie quickly changed the subject. JJ, a little stunned, looked over towards her direction. Like, to go hunting with? He asked, and Annie shrugged. Not necessarily, just to learn is all. I never went hunting before, she confessed. Well, I can take you if you want. I go pretty often, and I'm sure I can teach you how to shoot with one of Sean's old bows, since it's just collecting dust in the shed. JJ glanced at her and then the mirrors again. He regretted what he said immediately because of the trouble he was currently in. He was so wrapped up in the fact that he had a daughter, that for a couple moments he forgot everything that was going on. This was going to get the Cajun and her killed if he didn't snap out of it. I'm guessing I got lucky. You're not the girly girl type. 'Cause I'm not the best at shopping. JJ turned and grinned at her. Annie smiled a bit. I like shopping, but I don't think I would drag you along. I mean, I am a tomboy, but I also like some girly things. Like lipstick and hair dye. She twirled her blue strands around her finger a bit, examining them. JJ looked at her ridiculous hairstyle, but said nothing else about it. He didn't want to be mean, since he had just found out he has a 21-year-old daughter. JJ didn't want to be too harsh on her, the first day of meeting her. He just prayed that the two would grow on each other and get along. So far everything was going rather well, better than he expected. So why be an exterminator, now? Annie asked, curious about how he went from cop to pest control. JJ took a deep breath in. He did not want to tell her the whole truth about what happened between his time as cop and now. That part of his life, he wanted to stay buried and forget it as long as he could. Well, I always had a knack for catching critters. Every time they had an animal complaint on the force, they would make me go out there. Even when I was off, even the neighbors would call me out to get things out of their attic or backyard. I guess it was the best thing to get into when you were already known to be good at it. He answered truthfully, in the best way he could, to not bring up too much of his past. JJ hoped she wouldn't ask details about what made him quit the force, for that's where the truth of past demons laid, which he wished to remain hidden from his daughter. That side of him, he wished not to reveal, the dark part of him. Annie could tell he was a bit edgy around answering the question. She hadn't known him that long, but she was really good at reading people, and decided not to press the matter. Annie had things from her past that she hoped she wouldn't have to tell him. Annie wanted this to be a fresh start. A new life with her father and not have to remember the tattered past of her mother's home. Annie was going to do anything she had to remain in JJ's good graces. So music, huh? JJ asked, trying to change the subject. Annie was glad of it too as she nodded. Yes, I do like music. I used to sing in a band in high school. JJ was impressed. His daughter took up the very thing that brought him and her mother together. I'm guessing it didn't go well. JJ asked as he tossed her a glance. No, not really. It was nothing serious. It was just something that me and a couple friends used to do. Mom wanted me to try and become a professional, but I knew I would never make it. Plus I don't think I could take on all that responsibility and stuff. JJ nodded in understanding. Have you thought about what you wanted to do now? Like for a career? JJ continued driving. Not really. She replied, shrugging a bit. I understand. I didn't know what I wanted to do until I was about your age. Take your time. It will come to you. In the meantime, you can help me out. He gave a wicked smile, thinking she would be grossed out by having to deal with bugs or critters. All right. Annie shrugged to JJ's surprise. Really? Johnny asked. Yeah, sure. If it helps you out, plus I don't have anything else to do. All right then, you're hired. Johnny grinned as they traveled down the road. JJ could tell Annie was starting to get a little restless. She was pulling on the threads of her shorts. He figured he would try to keep her talking, and maybe the drive wouldn't be so long. So tomorrow, maybe we can go clothes shopping. You know, so you can maybe burn them shorts. JJ joked. Annie tried not to smile and shook her head. It's the style Dad. That was the second time he had ever been called Dad, and it gave him a fuzzy feeling. He smiled warmly at her as she shifted in her seat a little. Hearing something in the back hitting, they both looked and saw that the raccoon was getting more and more feisty. I know, buddy, we're going to release you now, okay? He knew that the raccoon couldn't hear him, but still felt bad for having the little critter in the truck for so long, but it really wasn't his fault. He couldn't help that his unknown daughter of 21 years would suddenly pop up out of nowhere, but JJ didn't complain. He was grateful. JJ made a right turn off of the main highway, and it automatically turned into marsh grass, and trees lined the bumpy asphalt. Every now and then the tree line would break to reveal sugarcane fields or the bayou. Johnny couldn't wait for his mom to get back from her vacation to meet Annie. She would definitely like her, as well as be thrilled she has a granddaughter to spoil. His mom often wrote him about settling down and making a family, but JJ knew that couldn't happen. Not with what he was involved with. Annie was a smart, sassy girl and had her sweet moments, just like her mother. Annie noticed her father smiling at her, and she returned the warm smile. She was so happy to finally find him, and was also grateful for him being so welcoming. Annie's worst fear was meeting her father and him not wanting anything to do with her, but he did the opposite. Johnny wanted Annie in his life. Little could have been said about Annie's mother's boyfriend and auntie. He was so quick to shove her off on her aunt, and then her aunt was quick to push her off on her dad. Johnny was also happy that Annie wanted to stay with him. So many people, including Becky, had either ran out on him or left him. He never had a good relationship with anyone, except for his brother. Even though his brother was dead, going on 12 years now, but now was his chance to have a family. Yeah, he had his mother still, but she was always gone, always busy. He dated every now and then, but they never worked out. JJ had soon gave up on the dating scene. So having Annie in his life was a godsend. Chapter 30. The heartfelt father-daughter bonding moment was short-lived. A car that JJ didn't notice before clipped him from behind, and JJ struggled to stay on the road. The blow, plus the weight in the back of the truck, made it spin a bit, but JJ controlled it enough for it not to go into the ditch or flip. He slammed on the brakes, leaving black marks on the road from the smoking tires. The truck finally came to a stop across the small two-lane, backcountry road. Woods and marsh surrounded both sides of the little road, so it was a perfect place for an ambush. No witnesses or anyone to help for miles. The black town car that had been following them since the restaurant pulled up and stopped a couple yards away. "You all right, Annie?" He looked over to check on her. She nodded as her knuckles turned white from the steel grip on her seatbelt. "What the heck happened?" she asked, a bit shaken up but not hysterical, more pissed than afraid. JJ turned to look at the town car and the man that exited it. Son of a JJ's eyes went wide. He kept his eyes on the man as his hand searched for his handgun that was stuck between the seat. Now, JJ knew he should have kept his guard up, especially now, since he had Annie, but he let it down. This mistake could cost both of their lives, but now was not the time to panic. Johnny knew he had to keep his head straight, if not for himself, then for his daughter. The tall, bulky-built black man made his way towards them. He had a shotgun in his hand which was almost the same color as his skin. "Johnny, da crazy Cajun." He spoke with a strong African accent as he pumped the shotgun. "Get down." JJ grabbed Annie's head and forced it to the seat. The shotgun pellets shot out of the window and peppered the side of the truck. Luckily it didn't go through. Johnny was smart enough to double-wield an armor-type shield on his little truck, just in case this would happen. JJ unbuckled Annie's seatbelt quickly. "Now, when I tell you to, you run into the woods and hide." Annie nodded and didn't say a word. She just listened and tried to stay calm like him, but fear could be seen in her eyes as she waited for JJ to say when. "Go." JJ yelled, raising up his handgun to shoot at the man to cover for Annie to escape. Annie did as she was told and took off running into the woods. The brush and thicket was right along the side of the highway, and Annie ran as fast as she could through it. Branches and leaves smacked her face as she forced her way through the thick grass. Annie's heart was pounding with fear, and she only paused a minute to get her boots out of the thick mud. JJ slid out of the truck, the same way Annie did, and laid his back against the cab of the truck. He heard the raccoon causing chaos in the bed of the truck, and it gave him an idea. "So Coho, who sent you?" he asked, reaching under the tire to grab his other gun and clip that he had hidden. "Oh JJ, you should know the answer to that question." Lucifer herself, of course. Coho shot another 2 rounds at the truck. JJ popped up quickly to shoot the rest of his clip for cover, so he could grab the raccoon bag. Coho was one of the devils from his past. The African warlord and hitman that for some reason stayed close to Marina after the demise of the hitman group. JJ took hold of the end of the bag and then ducked for cover. Looks like I caught you off guard, little Cajun. The man laughed and walked around from his car towards the truck. Who was the girl? A new girlfriend, maybe. She's a bit young for you, huh? He chuckled. Johnny was relieved they didn't know about his daughter, and he planned on keeping it that way. Well, I can't help it. The ladies love Johnny, he said, untying the raccoon's bag, but holding it closed. I don't see how anyone could like you. You are such an idiot. Coho slipped out his machete, that was attached to his belt, and walked around the truck. Coho rose the blood-stained machete up, and went to bring it down on JJ, but JJ let the coon out of the bag. The thing went straight for Coho's face. Coho screamed as the raccoon bit and clawed at him, causing the large man to stumble a bit. JJ rose up, aimed carefully, and put 6 rounds into the man's chest. The man fell back onto the ground, and the raccoon scurried off into the woods. Thanks, little buddy. JJ called after the coon and walked over to Coho. He wasn't dead but close to it. Coho groaned and cursed out loud. The large male was highly pissed. He was going to die at the hands of the crazy Cajun. So, why is Marina still after me? JJ asked, looking down at the man. JJ used his foot to scoot the machete out of Coho's reaching hand, and then bent over to pick it up. She wants all the loose ends gone. Nay, Coho coughed up blood. JJ shook his hand as he looked over the machete. He knew why Marina was after him, but he wanted to know what Coho knew. You know, Coho, to be honest, I never really like you. What kind of sicko decapitates people, even kids, with a dull machete? He asked with a bit of anger in his voice. The same sicko who blows them up. Coho coughed and wheezed again. I never killed kids, and at least I didn't make the people suffer. JJ brought down the dull blade into the man's skull. It took a couple good whacks to kill him, but JJ didn't mind. When Johnny was certain Coho was dead, he dropped the large knife from his hand. He let his hand dangle for a moment to get feeling back into it, before lifting it up to wipe the man's blood off his face. When he was finished, he called out for Annie. Annie. He called out for her, praying she didn't run off too far. The marsh was a dangerous place to get lost in. JJ then grabbed Coho's feet and began to drag him back to the town car. Annie, come on, we gotta go. He called out, as he opened the passenger side of the car. JJ paused his action when he heard a slight crunching noise. Annie came out of the woods slowly and as quietly as she could. She looked at the blood trail that led to her father and the dead man he was holding by the foot. Dad. She spoke in a low voice. Do you know how to drive? JJ asked as he grunted and strained to get the huge dude in the side of the car. Annie noticed he was having trouble and ran to help him. Yes, I do. The two managed to get the mercenary into the car, and JJ slammed the door. Good. I want you to drive the truck and follow me, okay? He asked. Annie nodded. She didn't ask questions. She just walked slowly back to the truck and got in the driver's seat. After the struggle of putting the dead Coho in the back seat, JJ walked around and got into the town car's driver's seat. He started it up and drove off down the road. Annie followed behind him like instructed. She was still trying to process everything that just happened. She knew freaking out wouldn't help anything, so she stayed quiet and did as she was told. She had millions of questions, but right now she didn't want to upset her dad. Not after what just happened. He went from the nice exterminator to the Terminator in 5 seconds. She wouldn't lie to herself, it scared her. He used to be a cop, so he had training. That wasn't the problem. The problem was, who was that guy? And why did he attack them? JJ drove off of the road to a little abandoned boat dock. It was so overgrown that if you didn't know about it, you would have passed it up. He cut the engine off and stepped out of the car, dialing on his phone. Annie's shaking hands opened the door to the truck and slowly slid out. Dad, what's going on? She asked, with a sense of fear in her voice. JJ didn't answer her. He was trying to get a hold of Jefferson. Dad, she spoke again. Annie, I'm sorry, give me a few minutes. He didn't mean to snap at her, but he needed to get a hold of Jefferson. Finally, after the fourth try, the FBI agent picked up. "Hello." He spoke in an agitated tone. "Jefferson, we have a problem. Coho attacked me. I had to take care of it." JJ glanced at Annie, who was staring at the town car. "Mr. Simoneau, are you all right?" he asked, not concerned. "Yeah, but we have another problem. Coho said that Marina is still after me, so now she will come after me herself. I also have another problem." He spoke the last part in a low tone as to not let Annie hear. "I have a daughter, Annie, and she found me. If she can find me and Coho can find me, you know Marina can. Jefferson, I need some backup now," JJ commanded, trying not to get too upset. "I have put a call into the local police as well as the FBI division close to you. I'm on my way out of the door now, JJ. Lay low and try to stay out of trouble." The agent continued to explain what was going to happen and how JJ needed to have faith in him. JJ just agreed and hung up the cell phone. He needed to get his daughter and himself to safety. Chapter 31. Let's go. He waved for her to get inside the truck. He paused, holding on to his keys. "Oh, and you definitely have to burn those clothes now," he added in, trying to lighten the mood. Annie could not tell if he was serious or joking. The past couple of moments were intense. How did she manage to keep her cool in all of this? Johnny thought to himself. She must have been through some things to be able to be this calm. The truck ride home was a bit quiet until JJ broke the silence. "Are you okay?" he asked her as he looked over at her. She nodded a bit but didn't speak. "'Cause if you're not, you can tell me, Annie. You were pretty calm in this whole ordeal, and it makes me wonder. Oh, and I'm sorry for yelling." He paused. "I know, I haven't been truthful. I thought if you didn't read Auntie's letter, then I could hide it from you and be the perfect daughter." She sighed deeply. "And here comes the bombshell," JJ thought to himself. "My aunt kicked me out. She said she didn't want a criminal living with her anymore. I was pretty bad growing up. I would steal from Mom and her a lot and also from stores. They knew the owners, so that is why I didn't get sent to juvie permanently. I did go once though. Mom's boyfriend was a bit rough with her when he was drunk, and I went after him with a hammer." Annie had a lingering pause, but she sighed and continued. "I spent 6 months there but got off easy 'cause Mom knew the judge. I didn't want to tell you because I wanted a fresh start." She looked over at him. "I don't want to have to leave. Whatever is going on, I don't care. I want to help." Annie was really confused on what happened, but she didn't want to leave her dad. JJ frowned a bit. "Annie, you do not have to help me. I am nothing like your aunt or whoever else you know. You are my daughter, my family, and I look after my family, no matter what." He wrapped his arm around her and brought her close, so he could kiss the top of her head. "But, you definitely got to dress better than this." He smiled and she swatted at him. I know. She rolled her eyes and smiled a bit. "I promise to explain everything at home." JJ sighed deeply. "Well, at least the raccoon is free." Annie tried not to laugh. JJ couldn't help but to crack a smile through his pounding heart and high-strung nerves. They finally arrived at his home, just as the sun was setting between the trees. The cicadas started to scream as JJ grabbed the groceries, with Annie's help, and walked into the house. The house was lifted up high, in case of flooding being so close to the coast. The paint was a bit faded and left it a pale blue color, and the yard was small and well kept. A boat was parked on the side of the house, along with a couple of sheds. JJ walked up the stairs, carrying a couple bags in his hands. He sat them on the porch and dug in his pocket to get the house key. Suddenly, a raccoon jumps on JJ's shoulder and places his paw on JJ's hat. "Hey, Sean," he laughed, raising a hand to pet him. "I got us some goodies and a guest." Annie looked up and froze when she saw the raccoon. JJ found the key and unlocked the door. He walked inside and flicked on the lights with his elbow, and sat the bags down inside. He turned to grab the bags that Annie had and walked into the house. "You have a raccoon as a pet?" she asked, as she sat down and watched the raccoon go through the bags. JJ walked over and shooed him away. Yes, his name is Sean. Sean, you will spoil your dinner, no. He swatted the tiny paws away from the bags. The raccoon made an annoyed sound and jumped on the small table. Annie looked around the small house. It was clean and well kept, which was a surprise to her. A couple of deer heads, fish, and shotguns hung on the wall. The living room was as equally small, having a camouflaged reclining chair. It was very redneck, but it reflected Johnny. I know it's small, smaller than my last house, but I had to move because of the hurricane. It flooded and a couple of trees fell onto the roof. JJ explained as he placed some bags on the small countertop. The raccoon waddled over to investigate. Annie liked the small country feel of it. Annie then walked over to the raccoon and reached out to let him sniff her fingers before petting him. This isn't the same raccoon that was in the truck, huh? She asked. No, that one was from out of a woman's attic. I was going to bring him back to meet Sean, but Coho ruined that. JJ explained, as he put the groceries away, making sure he put his spices and Tabasco over by the stove. I can't believe you have a raccoon. She giggled a bit as the raccoon played with her hair. He found me after Sasquatch died. My old patrol canine that I took with me when I quit the force. A couple years back, he died and the coon found me. He reminds me of my brother, so I named him Sean. JJ explained. Annie pet the raccoon, but her thoughts began to wander. You really haven't said much about my uncle, but I am guessing something bad happened to him, or you wouldn't name a raccoon after him. Care to tell me more about him? She had the feeling that she was hitting a sore topic, but she wanted to know everything, even the painful ones. JJ stopped midway of putting a couple of cans away, and just stared into the cabinet and thought, this is what I don't need right now, but she does have to know. He put away the groceries and turned and leaned against the counter, trying to figure out where to start. Then it hit him. Remember the story of the lady stuck in the swamp, sitting on the roof of her car? Annie nodded while going to sit down on one of the kitchen chairs. Well, of course, I left him to go help another officer on a call, since I was making sure he paid for giving my partner those darn sandwiches. JJ made a face of disgust like it happened just yesterday, which made Annie giggle a bit. JJ grabbed a soda out of the fridge and looked at Annie to see if she wanted one. Annie nodded and he handed her one. Well, later on that night, I had to go and help another officer with a crazy knife-wielding old lady. That was the first time that I had to draw my gun. He paused, thinking on how much he had changed since that moment. Anyway, the thing we were looking for wasn't there. He snapped out of his daze. Well, that is something. So you two were sent over there for practically nothing then, right? She asked, taking a drink. JJ nodded. Yeah, pretty much, but that was nothing compared to some other things I've seen, he said, pushing off the counter. He walked a few steps and sat down on the chair across from her. People give us such a hard time about things, but they do not see the things we see. They do not have to deal with things we deal with. Every day, you put on that badge, it could be your last. He sat there for a moment and took a deep breath, remembering different past memories. Annie sat quietly watching the raccoon try to get into something on the counter. It wasn't always horrible. I was also able to really help people, which again, that's why I joined in the first place. Like, there was this one time, I was able to buy some poor kids a couple of Christmas presents. Another time, I was able to put away an abusive husband, and most likely save the woman's life. JJ took a long drink from his soda, finishing the can and throwing it at Sean, the raccoon. I told you to stop or you will ruin your dinner. JJ and Annie both watched as the coon started playing with the can. I was able to handle the things that I saw when on the force, but Sean, he wasn't made for the job. He should have stayed working with our uncle, but he had to follow along with me. An example of how he wasn't made for it was when we were separated. So how and why did you and my uncle get separated? Annie asked and sat up a little straighter, waiting for him to continue his story. JJ told her the story of how Sean tossed the homeless man after he pepper sprayed him, setting him on fire. Let's just say, the only reason Sean kept his job was because the chief split us up, as well as put him on suspension. He was really lucky. After a few minutes of silence, JJ knew something was bothering her. Okay, what's up, Shaw? Something's bothering you, so spill it out. Of nowhere she comes back with, Dad, what if the cops show up? You were one, I'm sure, Annie said frantically, looking around. JJ stopped and shushed her. They won't, I promise. Annie, I haven't been all the way truthful with you. He frowns and ran his hand through his messy hair under his hat. What do you mean? Annie's face was full of fear and confusion. Let's go sit down. JJ placed his hand on her shoulder and led her to the couch. He then sat down beside her quietly, trying to figure out a way to tell her about his messed up past. He removed his hat and fiddled with it in his hands nervously a bit. Annie, I'm no hero. I have plenty of demons, and the past is coming back to bite me in the rear. People often blame the devil, like the devil made them do it, but in reality, we ourselves are the devil, and are responsible for our own actions, and every action has a consequence. I should have known that and sent you off, but I never got to see you growing up, and I wanted to get to know you. For putting you in danger, I am sorry. He sighed and continued staring at the floor. It all started when Sean died. JJ proceeded to tell her the storm that he got himself into. JJ looked up to see how his daughter was reacting to all of this, and found her sitting there with her legs under her, and just listened as he continued. He told her everything. She deserved to know the truth and why her life was now endangered because of him. He told her how he killed the congressman, tried to run, and how the crooked CIA agent caught him. How he joined a cartel to try and get to the people responsible, and how he made such a mess out of his life. He told her of Nate and Paige and the crazy London trip. Also, how now he was undercover working with the FBI to bring in the remaining cartel members in Marina. And that's how I became a hitman. From that day forward I was considered a wanted man. JJ explained. Okay, so who was that guy? Annie asked. JJ took another sigh and rose up from the couch. That was someone I knew in my hitman days. We were in a group, an organization you could say. 6 of us plus the leader, making 7, he said as he walked to the kitchen to grab a beer from the fridge. Annie quickly got up from the couch and followed him. She leaned on the counter. A group of hitmen? She asked, still trying to understand who was after them. The 7 devils, or Los 7 demonios. He paused and looked over at her. Sean found a case of grapes and popped open the lid. JJ swatted him away and took the case. The coon reached up pitifully and JJ gave in, giving him a handful before putting the case in the fridge. Annie was still trying to wrap her head around the death of her uncle. Now he was telling her he was part of a group of killers. This is a lot to process. She admitted as her legs started to bounce up and down due to nervousness. I know, Annie, but it's the truth. I didn't want to involve you in all this, but I couldn't push you away either. I need to get in contact with Nathaniel. Hopefully, he is still alive and she didn't get to him. JJ petted Sean, thinking out loud. Who is Nathaniel exactly, and who is she? Annie asked. She is Marina, the woman who created the organization. JJ began to explain what had happened last year. Nate was one of the hitmen who helped me. The one with the rich girlfriend, Paige. He reminded Annie of that part of the story. Anyway, after that, I came home and turned my life around and gave it to God. However, Marina is still out there, wanting to take it. Like I said, I'm undercover for the FBI, who is waiting for Marina to make her move, and well, she has. No doubt she will be on her way now. That was the last of her group. JJ knew that Annie must be tired and hungry, especially after the day's events. He got up, threw away his now empty can, and turned to look at Annie. You must want to freshen up, huh? JJ knew that because right now he wanted to take a hot shower and get rid of the remnants of today off his body. He also knew that if he was getting hungry, then so was Annie. Annie nodded. Well, grab your stuff. You can put it in the back bedroom, while I head to my room, which is over on the other side. He pointed with his head toward the other side of the house. Annie grabbed her stuff and headed toward the back bedroom. Once she was out of view, he went to the front door, peeked out of the blinds to have a look around real quick. Arming his security system first, JJ went to his room. After peeling off all his clothes, he placed them into a black trash bag and got into the shower while thinking back to who he needed to call to make sure that his daughter would be safe. The first person that came to mind was Nate. He needed to call Jefferson again to tell him everything that happened as well as verify Annie. That short phone call did not give the Cajun the time that he needed to explain everything. Even though he was putting his trust in Jefferson, JJ trusted Nate more since the two were in the same mess since day one. He ran a hand through his hair, messing it up even more. Everything had just become more stressful for the Cajun. The devil made her move, and JJ needed to report it. The Cajun finally just shot Jefferson a quick text, explaining the gist of everything. He didn't feel like talking to him, nor explaining what he did and why he did it. JJ sat the phone down and grabbed his pills from behind his bathroom mirror. He took a few and swallowed them quickly. JJ didn't need his crazy coming out now. He knew he had to keep a level head. He turned on the water to the shower and got under the hot water. JJ then closed his eyes and let the day's events wash away. He placed both hands against the wall, closed his eyes, and remembered back to how he actually got Nate's respect in their little endeavor. How he was going to most likely go after Marina, despite the FBI's warning. JJ knew that Nate would back him up, no matter what. They both shared a hatred for the government. JJ sighed and wiped his face a bit, trying to keep calm and let his medicine kick in. Chapter 32. Across town, a caramel-skinned Latina woman walked into the almost empty house. It looked like one of those show houses for a new community, with prop furniture and whatnot. She left the door open and walked straight to the sink in the kitchen. She sat her silver pistol on the granite countertop and used her elbow to turn on the faucet. The female's long curls bounced as she washed the blood from her hands in the warm water. When she was done, she turned the water off and reached for the plaid dish towel to dry her hands off. Ms. Alvarez, one of the three males, spoke up as he entered the home behind her. The female turned around and looked over at him. "I haven't heard from Coho." I think the Cajun may have, but before he could finish his sentence, Alvarez picked up her pistol and shot the man in the leg. The man let out a scream in pain and fell over. The two other men backed away from the fallen man. They then looked up at the female as she sat the gun back down. She crossed her arms and looked at the other two, ignoring the one screaming on the floor. "Yes, I know I shot the messenger, but I do not like my messengers thinking they either know the information or do not. Now, you two get me a correct status on the Cajun." The men went to walk out, but the woman made a noise like clearing her throat. "Don't forget Gabriella." They stopped and turned back around to grab the messenger on the floor before walking out. The silence was short-lived when her cell phone rang. Slipping her hand in her skinny jeans, she pulls out her phone and answers it. "Marina, is it done?" a male asked in Spanish. Marina leaned against the counter and kept her gaze at the wall across from her. A single wooden cross hung from a nail. "Marina?" the man asked again, more frustrated. "Why can't my father ask me that question? Why does he get his puppet to speak for him?" She growls. "Marina, you know that you are not allowed to speak with him nor him to you. Your father is in this mess because of you. He is in jail because of you." Marina clenched her fists at his words. "You clean this mess up, or you go down with him. We cannot afford to keep catering to your silly games. This is a boo." Marina slipped the phone into the sink with the water still running as she walked out. All she ever wanted was to run the family business and make her father proud. Everything failed greatly and with epic backlash. Her father was in jail. Her devil group gone, either dead or betrayed her. Her mother and brother left when they noticed the money and ship sinking. Marina was practically alone. The other groups and alliances were either dead, or they wanted nothing to do with the failed organization. Marina's world was going down in flames, and the Cajun was the main reason for it. No more sending people after him. It was time for her to step up and take care of things herself. She was a woman with nothing left to lose. JJ snapped out of his memory by the ice-cold water that was running down his body. Crap, how long was I in the shower? He mumbled to himself as he turned the water off and rushed to dry off. He needed to make him and Annie something to eat, and he also needed to make a few calls, since now knowing that Marina came close to taking him out, he needed to make sure his daughter would be safe from the devil. Once JJ was out of the shower, he just threw on a pair of sweats and walked barefooted into the kitchen. He noticed that Annie was sitting on the couch, playing with Sean the raccoon. JJ leaned up against the wall and just watched them for a few minutes. Looks like you two were getting along well, and normally Sean doesn't get along with others. JJ smiled as he pushed off of the wall and headed into the kitchen to make them something to eat. Yeah, he's kinda cute, nothing like that crazy thing you had caught, Annie replied, still swirling the string she was playing with Sean. JJ laughed as he pulled out all the ingredients to make bacon cheeseburgers. Yeah, Rocket was a little more crazier than Sean. You wanna come help me? He got done bringing everything out as Annie walked into the kitchen. Sure, Mom taught me how to cook at an early age, she said, as she went up to the sink to wash her hands and dry them on a dish towel. What would you like me to do? She asked with her arms crossed. You can cut the tomatoes and lettuce, JJ told her as he sat the pan on the stove. For the next hour, they chatted just about general things like music and movies. Annie learned of JJ's well-known knowledge in movies and classic rock. Once dinner was done, Annie let out a big yawn. Why don't you go get some rest? You had a pretty long and stressful day. Annie just nodded her head. But what about cleanup? JJ just shooed her out towards her room. Don't worry, I got it. You just get you some rest, okay? She let out another big yawn. Okay. Good night, Dad, she said as she walked into her room and closed her door. Dad, wonder if I will ever get used to that, he thought to himself as he turned away from her door and headed into his room. He grabbed his phone to check his messages. Jefferson texted back with Annie's birth certificate, license, etc., indicating she was who she said she was. A sigh of relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. He needed to make a call to warn Nate that Marina is trying to tie up a few loose ends. JJ quickly dialed Nate's number. It rang and rang with no answer. Crap, he hung up and dialed Paige. On the second ring, the female picked up. Hello, Paige, JJ asked. Johnny, thank God you called. Are you alright? Paige inquired. I tried to call Nathaniel's phone, but he never answered, JJ explained. Yeah, he is alright. He just stepped outside to gather our things. Paige used her shoulder to prop up the phone as she placed a bag on a hotel bed. Paige, Marina, she found me, JJ sighed. I was calling to warn you too and to see if I could get some help. JJ leaned against his countertop. We thought so. She sent some men after us as well. Me and Nate took care of them, but we know it will not be the end of it. Paige sat on the bed beside her bag. Nate walked back into the room and looked over at Paige on the phone. Who is that? He asked, closing and locking both locks on the door. It's JJ. Here, let me put it on speaker, JJ. Nate came back in the room. Okay, you're on speaker. JJ perked up and gripped the phone tightly. Nate, I have a problem. Marina sent Coho after me. I took care of him, but I'm sure she will be here for me personally. I hate to ask any more from you two, but I need help. JJ paused and glanced in the living room to make sure Annie was not eavesdropping. Marina will not only kill me but my daughter, and then come after you two. If we come together like we did before, I am sure we can bring her down once and for all, JJ explained. Nate watched the phone that was in Paige's hand. Did you call Jefferson? Nate asked as he placed his hands on his hips. Yes, he is aware of the situation and is on his way down, but I doubt he will arrive before Marina. JJ sighed deeply. You have a daughter, JJ. Paige lifted a brow when she questioned the Cajun. Yes, it is a lot to explain. Just right now, I need to know if you two are going to help me, JJ said bluntly. He didn't mean to be, but he needed an answer. Of course we will, Johnny. Just give us your address, and we will be there as soon as possible. Paige answered for the both of them. Thank you. I know your lives are already on hold, and to ask more of you, JJ trailed off. We are in this together, Nate reassured him. JJ, you are a friend and practically family now. We have been through so much together. I think it is fitting we are together till the end of the line. Bucky. Paige chuckled, knowing JJ would appreciate the humor and movie reference. JJ did, and he let out a chuckle. Seems like I rubbed off on you. JJ was relieved a bit. Nate just gave Paige a really look before speaking. Give us your location. We are on the way. Thank you. I will text you the address. JJ hung up and said a small thank you prayer. We will? Nate asked after JJ hung up. Paige placed the phone on the side of her. Nathaniel. Paige eyed him. She knew he was going to make her stay behind. What? He gave her a confused look. We are in this together, remember? Even if you hadn't helped JJ in the past, she still would be after us. Remember, the whole mess you got into was for helping me. You two are both in the same boat. It would be smart to work together. Paige explained. Like before. Cause that works so well. Nate crossed his arms. We both went through this, or do you remember anything from last year? We will never be at peace or safe until she is gone. The two just glared at each other, going through the past memories of the year before. All right, I couldn't make you stay even if I wanted. Nate threw his hands in the air and walked towards the door. The two proceed to leave the safe hotel. It really isn't safe anymore, being men came after them. Nate wanted to finish this as well as help his friend. Paige knew Nathaniel would go anywhere Paige would, and Paige would do anything to help Johnny. Chapter 33. JJ woke up and walked into the kitchen. He was surprised to see Annie awake this early and still around. He would have bet that she would have ran out. She slammed the phone down when she noticed him round the corner. Morning. He walked to the fridge to grab the milk. Morning. Annie ate her cereal slowly, avoiding eye contact with him. Who was that? He asked. My aunt. I don't want to talk about it. Johnny knew Rebecca's sister all too well, so he didn't question it. How did you sleep? He asked as he poured him a glass of milk. He then placed the half-gallon back in the icebox. Okay, I guess. She shrugged her shoulders as she picked at her bowl with her spoon. The raccoon dropped out of the ceiling, scaring JJ a bit. Even Annie jumped out of her daze. JJ jumped and raised his fists. Boy, I swear. He cursed and eased up when he saw it was Sean, his raccoon. The raccoon had something in his hands, and JJ snatched it from him. It was a block of C4 with a few teeth marks. Sean, really? JJ gave the raccoon a look as he stuffed it in his jeans pocket. The raccoon scurried off of the counter and ran to the living room, making a noise. Annie leaned over to watch the furry creature dig through JJ's bag in the corner. She couldn't help but smile at the cuteness of the furry creature. JJ just glared at the coon as he drank his glass of milk. The glass was pressed to his lips when it all of a sudden shattered. JJ's face and floor was sprayed with milk as a bullet had ripped through the glass and embedded into the kitchen wall. He quickly dropped the remains of the shards of glass and ran to Annie. Rounds of bullets followed right behind the Cajun. JJ grabbed Annie and fell to the ground under the table. The chair flipped out from underneath her as it was quickly riddled with bullets. Annie had a death grip on her phone and was shivering from fear. Milk, cereal, and wood splinters were lodged in both of their hair as JJ examined Annie. Annie, stay here and stay low and hidden, he instructed after he made sure she was not hit. JJ grabbed the Glock and shotgun that he had taped under the table and made sure they both were loaded. He then crawled out from underneath the table and made his way towards the living room. He wanted to get to his bag, but the bullets peppered through the wall and prevented it. The shooting finally stopped, and JJ could hear footsteps coming from his back porch. A male entered through the kitchen and made his way towards the living room. When the male was in sight, JJ raised his shotgun and blasted the man back. He hit the wall and slid down, followed by a trail of blood. Another man came running in through the front door before he could repump the shotgun. JJ waited for the man to pass before he used the gun like a baseball bat and swung at the man's legs. The gun made contact with the man's knees, and he fell. JJ leapt on top of him and began to hit the man with the butt of the shotgun. JJ hit him a couple times before quickly pumping it and shooting the man in the face. "Annie, go to the back room and lock the door. If anyone but me comes through the door, use the gun in the dresser, you got it." JJ spoke in a low tone so that only she could hear him. Annie nodded and began to quickly crawl out from under the table, with her hands still gripping her phone. She crawled through the kitchen to the living room. Bullets began to whiz by again, barely missing the young woman. All JJ could do was watch desperately and pray she didn't get hit. Annie let out a scream as she crawled as fast as she could. JJ couldn't take it anymore, hearing his daughter's whimpers of fear. He raised his gun and fired in the direction to give her cover fire. JJ made sure to hear the door slam before running to his bag in the corner. He grabbed extra clips and the other handguns inside it. He quickly shoved them in his pockets before crawling to the window. JJ peeked out of the window as he reloaded to see a couple of men walking towards the house from their vehicle. JJ stood up slowly and ran towards the front door. Taking a deep breath, he burst out of the door, firing down at the two men. The men scattered, but JJ was able to clip one of them in the chest. The other hid behind the small pecan tree just as bullets sprayed it. JJ's clip ran out, so he ducked down behind the porch railing and dug in his pocket for another clip. He pulled out the C4 he had stuffed in there earlier, and was going to discard it, until he noticed Sean scrambling across the porch with a taser in his paws. "Sean, give me that." He held out his hand. Sean made a fussing noise, but JJ gave him the evil eye. The raccoon held the taser close and hissed, not wanting to give up what he had stolen. "Sean," he commanded in a stern voice. The raccoon dropped the taser gun and ran off. JJ reached his foot out and used his heel to scoot the taser closer to him. When the gun was an arm's length, he scooped it up and made sure it still worked. JJ peeked around to see the other man advancing from behind the tree, and gave a wicked grin. He quickly stands up and throws the C4 at the man, underhand. Instinctively the man caught the brick of C4. The Latino man curiously looked it over, not sure what it was. JJ aimed the taser's red laser point at the gray block that was in the enemy's hands. "Electric charge," he said before pulling the trigger. Something Nate taught him that he would never forget. The barbs shot out and hit the C4, causing it to explode. JJ ducked down to avoid being hit by the blast or flying body parts. The Cajun let out a laugh when he rose up again. "I had no idea that would work." He noticed Sean behind a potted plant. "You have a little Mexican meat on you there, buddy." He pointed to a piece of flesh that clung to the raccoon's ear. JJ felt bad for poking fun, and handed the taser back to his critter friend. The coon snatched it and took off up a tree that hung over the porch. JJ scanned the area and made sure there were no more assailants before running back into the house. He swiftly ran to the phone and dialed Nate's number. "Annie, grab your things, let's go," he screamed out as he waited for Nate to pick up the phone. "Yeah," Nate answered. "Nate, they made out where I live. Look, I need to take Annie somewhere safe. To my aunt's house, then I can meet you somewhere else." JJ huffed as he packed his bag. "We can meet you at your aunt's if you like." Nate looked over at Paige, who watched him to try and figure out what was going on. JJ sighed and gave them the address. "I will be there, but I think we should meet elsewhere, like off the highway or something," JJ explained as he watched Annie walk into the kitchen slowly. She had her phone in her hands with a death grip. JJ could tell she was afraid, and he looked over at her with compassion. "I have to go, Nate." He hung up and put his hand on Annie's face. "I'm sorry about all this, Annie, I really am. I didn't mean to drag you in on all this. I'm taking you to my aunt's house so that I can finish what I started. I don't want anyone else hurt." JJ slung the bag over his shoulders and grabbed his keys. Annie looked around at the house at the disaster the bullets left and was speechless. Her eyes slowly fell on the bodies on the floor. She was finally snapped out of her daze by JJ yelling for her to hurry up. Annie quickly ran to gather her things and follow her father out of the house. Nate and Paige were only a few hours away from where JJ lived. Nate pressed his foot on the gas and sped down the highway. "What's going on?" Paige asked, as she watched Nate become uneasy. "They attacked JJ at his home." Nate began to pass up cars as he weaved through traffic. "Is he and his daughter all right?" Paige was concerned for her friend's life. Nate just gave her a worried look before concentrating on the road. The two knew that they would not be safe until they took out Marina. She was the cause of all this. Paige removed her phone and quickly called Agent Jefferson. Ever since the hotel incident and the truth about Kevin's operation was unveiled, Jefferson convinced the FBI to pick up the case. JJ, Nate and Paige were all undercover and under protection from the FBI. Just as long as they ate and would testify against the cartel. Marina, of course, must have got wind of this. The devil already had it out for the Cajun and Nate for betraying her. The FBI's deal was just the icing on the cake. She had laid low and gathered her intel to act against the three. It was only a matter of time when the beast would rear her ugly head, and that time was now. JJ and Annie sat at a red light not far from his Aunt Claire's house. JJ's nerves were over the edge, and his past demon was screaming. He had forgotten to take his medicine. His leg bounced up and down as he started to sing, "The Devil Went Down to New Iberia," a remake from Georgia and the Charlie Daniels Band. Ironically, his name was Johnny as well. "Why did you even take me in?" Annie demanded in a harsh tone. "You take me in just to drop me off somewhere else." Annie gripped her seatbelt in anger. JJ turned to her upset now. "I'm not just dropping you off. You think I want this?" "Annie, I have lost my brother, your mother, and everyone else I loved. I'm not going to lose you too. Yes, this is my fault and my mess, and I intend to clean it up, but I won't have you paying for my mistakes," JJ declared angrily. "My name's Johnny, and it might be a sin, but I'll take your bet, and you're gonna regret 'cause I'm the best there's ever been," he sang. He then tried to calm down by saying a couple prayers. Annie looked over at him like he was crazy, but she was so upset, she didn't care what gibberish he was saying. "I already am." Annie spoke harshly. "Well, you got a better idea. Huh? By all means, let me know." "I'm doing the best I can, alright," JJ yelled back as he took off at the green light. Annie took out her phone and began texting like crazy. JJ didn't question it. He was so upset that he sped down the street carelessly. He continued to mutter the song under his breath. "'Cause hell's broke loose in New Iberia, and the devil deals the cards. And if you win you get the shiny fiddle made of gold. But if you lose the devil gets your soul." "JJ, you shouldn't be so harsh with her." Sean spoke up from the back seat. "Not now, Sean." He growled, trying not to look at the rear view mirror. He thought all this was over. He thought the voices were gone. Annie looked at him like he was crazy as he talked to himself. "You have nobody to blame but yourself for this mess, Johnny. You took it upon yourself to kill the man in my name and continue on. You could have prevented all this by just letting the law do its job." Sean argued back. "That is just it. They wouldn't have done their job. They would have let that prick walk and get away with everything." JJ growled. "Yeah, and now you will have nothing, JJ. Nothing, 'cause you took the law in your hands. You took it in your hands and you didn't stop. You kept on killing in my name, and now look what it has gotten you, nothing but trouble and heartache. You could say you died right along with me, Johnny. Instead of living your life, you pursued death, and now the devil is coming for his dues." And with that, Sean's face flashed, showing a bullet hole in his head. At the sight, JJ's heart skipped a beat. The vision of his brother then flashed to show JJ's devil sight in the gas mask, just staring at him. It raised and pointed 2 fingers at JJ through the mirror, before it pressed the fingers to its temple. The devil image used its thumb to signify a gun going off. Imaginary blood sprayed the back window, and JJ jumped a bit. He wanted so badly to look away but couldn't. The devil lay slumped over as Marina's image appeared beside it. I'm coming for you, Cajun. For you, your family, and your whole generation. The image hissed before disappearing. The words that she had warned him when he first joined the Seven Devils echoed in his brain. Johnny could feel a sick knot in the pit of his stomach, but he pressed on. He needed to get his daughter to safety. Half an hour of eerie silence passed before JJ reached his Aunt Claire's home. Every now and then JJ would look in the mirror, but the images were long gone. Long gone, but they left a horrible impression of his future. JJ quickly parked in the driveway of his aunt's home and hopped out of the truck. He walked about halfway before noticing that Annie was still in the truck. JJ stopped in his tracks and took a deep breath. He fussed with himself and grumbled as he walked back to the truck. JJ opened the passenger side and said nothing. He just simply pointed to the house and glared at her. Annie rolled her eyes and grabbed her backpack. She knew he would most likely grab her and carry her if he needed to, so Annie brushed past him and walked briskly towards the house. JJ slammed the door and followed her. Annie waited beside the door and avoided eye contact with him. Her face was buried in her phone, typing away. JJ knocked loudly on the wooden door and waited. He then knocked again a bit harder. "Aunt Claire," he yelled out and tried to peek through the window of the door. JJ grew impatient and began to look for her spare key. He lifted a dead plant and grabbed the key from the ground and unlocked the door. He stepped foot into the small home and made his way into the living room. Annie followed inside and closed the door behind her, softly. She watched JJ storm through the house, looking for his aunt. Annie stopped at the edge of the living room and looked over at the couch. The small couch was occupied by Marina and a slumped-over woman. She stood there just blinking. JJ called out for his aunt as he searched the whole house. Chapter 34. JJ cursed to himself and turned to walk back towards the living room. JJ noticed Annie standing motionless and staring at something as he walked closer towards his daughter. His eyes then followed to where she was staring as he exited the small hallway. JJ's heart sank into his gut. It was Marina and his aunt sitting on the couch. "Hello, my little Cajun." Marina broke the silence and her cold voice echoed in JJ's mind. The old demon inside his head was screaming while he remained silent and unable to move. "Meet your aunt. Too bad your mother was not home, but I am sure I will meet her soon enough." Marina patted the shoulder of his dead aunt. "She prayed, you know. She even told me that she forgave me." Marian looked over at the dead woman and smiled warmly. The way she was talking all sweet-like made JJ want to puke. "It reminded me of my grandmother. Oh, how we are such alike, Johnny. Both with strong Christian families, and look at us. We both turned out like this. A pity, really, how we didn't live up to their expectations. Your mother proved difficult to kill, my men informed me. She had your spirit, but she couldn't outrun a bullet." Marina rose from the couch and walked over towards Johnny. The Cajun stood motionless with clenched fist as he tried his best to calm the storm his demon was brewing. "It really wasn't that difficult to find you, Johnny. Did you really think that FBI agent Jefferson could have helped you? It was noble of you to still try and aid them even after Kevin's betrayal. Believe me, I hated him just as much. Kevin betrayed me as well, but he got what he deserved in the end. Now you will too. You and everyone who helped you, Johnny." She unexpectedly reached out, grabbed Johnny's shirt, slamming him against the wall. "I warned you if you crossed me, I would annihilate not only you, but everything you knew." Marina wasn't screaming, but spoke to him in a calm manner. It made JJ even more uneasy at her demeanor. Marina slowly took out her handgun and pressed it under Johnny's chin. "Your troubles were all in vain. You do know that, right? You ended up neck deep in working for the same people who had your brother killed. Pretty ironic, but wait, there's more. Do you know how I was able to find you?" Marina sneered as her eyes grew wide. "You love this one, Johnny." She removed the gun and took a step back. JJ swallowed hard. This was some real Jerry Springer mess, and everything was being laid out on the table. Marina watched the Cajun a bit before slowly holding the gun out to Annie to take. "You or your aunt eyes." Marina kept her eyes on the Cajun and waited for Annie. JJ's eyes went wide, and his mouth almost dropped from shock. "Oh, what, JJ, you didn't know?" Marina looked over at Annie, who stood there silently. "I had your little daughter here track you down. Told her if she took you out she and her aunt would escape my wrath." Marina looked back at Annie, who was looking at the floor. "Oh, don't tell me you feel bad about it." Marina turned completely to face Annie. "You told me yourself it would be easy, since you never knew him." Marina shoved the gun in the young woman's hands. "Do it." Marina hissed in a commanding voice. Annie took the gun in her chipped, nail-polished hands and walked a few steps towards her father. The gun shook in her trembling palms. "Annie, you don't have to do this." JJ was almost in tears. "Shut up. Just shut up, okay?" Annie screamed at her father. JJ flinched a bit at her words. Marina took a few steps behind Annie and watched the whole scene unfold. A wicked smile was plastered across her face at the chaos she created. This was entertainment for Marina, getting the Cajun's only remaining family member to kill him. Annie rose the gun slowly, aiming at the Cajun's head. "She took my aunt, the only thing I had in this world, because of you. A father that didn't even know I existed, who didn't even care to reach out and learn of it. Marina told me if I killed you I could see her again." Annie's voice was raspy with a mixture of fear and hatred. "Annie, they most likely have been killed already. Do you really think Marina would have left her or you live? You cannot trust these people. They're nothing but death and destruction. Hell, her name is Lucifer, and she worships a death goddess, for heaven's sake. Yes, she may talk a good game, but in the end you just end up in a body bag." JJ grind his teeth as he looked over at Marina. He hated this woman so much, and now she was making his daughter do this. Dragging her into this mess. "You weren't there. You never were. This is all your fault. You got into this mess and now you brought me into it. I didn't even know you existed till a few weeks ago." Annie screamed. "I had no clue about you." Annie cried out. "If you or your mother would have reached out to me. How can you blame me for what your mother did?" JJ screamed back. "The same reason Marina is blaming me for your mistakes." Annie growled and cocked the hammer back. "Annie, Marina is lying to you. She always lies. Once you kill me, she will kill you. Darkness dressed up as vengeance is still darkness, but even darkness can show you the light. It can show you the mistakes you have made, and I have learned from that. Violence begets violence, and Annie, you become just like the people you swore vengeance against. You become a monster, a demon. Hell, look at her." JJ pointed to Marina. "You become the very monster you try and take down, if not worse. I know you didn't grow up in a happy, healthy home, and for that, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there, but like I told you before, if you would have just reached out to me, all of this would have been very different. I'm sorry you were paying for my mistakes, Annie, but please, please do not make them. Do not become like me. Give me the gun." JJ pleaded as tears streamed down Annie's face, the pistol shaking in her hand as she let his words sink in. Annie lowered the gun and dropped it to the ground. JJ reached out and took his daughter in his arms. She began to weep in his chest as JJ patted her hair. Marina had enough of the whole touching moment. She went to bend down for the gun, but JJ took out his own. She paused midway and stared down at the barrel. "Wow, you are a hypocrite, you know that. That whole touching speech, and you are just going to kill me." Marina stood up slowly, eyeing the Cajun. JJ's trigger finger itched to pull the trigger. His voice is screaming in his head. Sean saying no. And his demon yelling at him to kill her. He closed his eyes to try and calm his mind. Finally, the image of Annie smiling and calling him Dad silenced the voices. JJ smiled as he lowered the gun. "I'm not going to kill you, and you know what? I forgive you. I forgive you for all the pain you caused me and my family. God forgave me of my wrongdoings, so I need to forgive others." Marina noticed him lower the gun, and she quickly reached for her own on the floor. Marina let out a chuckle as she pointed it at JJ and Annie. Wrong move, Cajun. She kept a wicked smile on her face. I'm not going to kill you, but that doesn't mean he won't. JJ lifted his head up and motioned for Marina to look behind her. Marina whipped her head around to see Nate standing there with his gun pointed at her. Before she could say anything, Nate pulled the trigger. The bullet exited the gun and pierced through the head of the woman who called herself Lucifer. Marina fell back to the ground and lay dead. Nate lowered his gun to his side as he glared down at the monster. All Nate uttered was a huh. Paige came running in to see the woman on the floor and then over to JJ, who was holding his daughter. Thank God. Paige placed her hand on Nate's shoulder as the three were finally out of the grip of the mad woman. Devil, just come on back. If you ever want to try again, I done told you once I'm the best that's ever been. He muttered to her dead corpse. Chapter 35. JJ tried to wrap his head around everything that happened. Years worth of searching for his brother's killer, and killing as well as trying to get to Marina. It was all over within a matter of seconds. Marina could have killed him easily, but JJ was reminded of a sermon. We are kept alive because the old man was dead. We are covered with the blood of Jesus. God will keep the new man alive, the new creature in Christ, the one that now serves him. Death and repentance, burial and baptism, and made a new creature by the Holy Spirit. Months later, Agent Jefferson had enough evidence to lock up the rest of the Alvarez cartel, along with their members. JJ and Nathaniel were pardoned on all crimes, since the two testified against the cartel and the rogue CIA agents. Paige's company was shut down for a while pending the investigation. After the trials, Paige left the board to run the company. She still would have a major say in things, but the board primarily ran it. JJ would often tease her and call her Batwoman. Paige didn't mind joking along with him, since it gave her the idea to open up a side company. A company that her and Nate could run. A company that could put Nate's skills to use and not have him running off again. A fugitive recovery agency. The Bull and Paige could run after baddies and bring them to justice. JJ would help sometimes, but Paige warned him if he didn't stop dressing up like Dog the Bounty Hunter, she would make him work the desk only. JJ was also able to get help for his PTSD that caused the voices in his head. No more Demon or Sean to whisper in his ear. The Cajun was finally able to have peace with prayer. He continued to run his exterminating business with the help of his daughter. Annie moved in with her father, after finally forgiving him about the death of her aunt. He really was the only family she had left and vice versa. The two started over and became very close. JJ was able to be the loving father that he always wanted to be. Annie even became close with Paige. The two bonded close, with Paige giving her motherly advice, as well as shopping tips per JJ. Annie was even Paige's maid of honor at her and Nate's small wedding. The wedding was so special that JJ found someone to call his own, Paige's cousin Megan. The four were a tight-knit family. Even though they were not all related, they all had lost their own family, and formed this strange little one. So much tragedy brought these four people together, but in the end, the Cajun did the right thing, and was able to clear his conscience. This unlikely renegade became a hero. Nice wedding, Nate. Can't believe of all people, you would be the one getting hitched. JJ smiled at him while holding a bottle of water. You would have never thought you would live long enough to see it. Nate grinned and took a sip of his own beer. The two men sat off to the sideline and watched Paige, in her wedding dress, and Annie dance. Well, you deserve a long vacation now, buddy. JJ raised his beer when he caught Paige's attention. She smiled back at him, but then her smile faded when she thought she caught a glimpse of someone. Nate's own face dropped as he glanced around before making his way towards her. JJ followed close behind, nursing his water bottle. Are you alright? Nate asked as he stood beside her. Yes, I just thought I saw. Never mind. It was nothing, Nate. JJ, why don't you have a father-daughter dance with Annie? She suggested and took JJ's water from him. She practically pushed him towards his daughter. Well, okay. JJ took his daughter and spun her around a bit. The Steeles looked on happily as they watched the Cajun enjoy himself. Paige caught a glimpse of the man again, this time pointing him out to Nate. Nate beckoned JJ to come towards him. Nate then pulled out a piece of paper to show JJ a wanted man. Nate, man, it's your wedding. He laughed a bit. Paige sighed. He never stops working, not even today. Go ahead, you two go get him. She couldn't help but laugh. As she spoke and gave the okay, Nate and JJ took off running. The man noticed them, and he took off as well. Annie noticed the commotion and walked over towards Paige. What is going on? Annie watched her dad and Nate run after the man, almost in a comical way. The usual. Bad guys run, our boys chase. She laughed and put her arm around Annie. Come on, I have a bouquet to throw. The two women chuckled and turned to leave the men chasing after the suspect.